We are on air.
All right, I call the 2,348th meeting of the Milwaukie City Council to order. This meeting is being conducted by video conference. The public has been invited to participate in this meeting by joining the Zoom webinar or watching on the city's YouTube channel or on Comcast cable channel 30 in city limits. There will be opportunities for the public to give oral testimony during today's meeting. If you are interested in speaking, please let staff know by emailing ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. When it is time to take public comment, staff will monitor the email inbox, the Zoom participant list, and the Zoom chat to see if anyone would like to speak. We will take comments in the order that they are received and seen. The public may submit written comments by email to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. Spanish translation services are available upon request. The public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. Contamos con servicio de traducción al español cuando sea solicitado. Se pide al público que se solicite servicios de traducción y otros servicios de accesibilidad para reuniones por lo menos 48 horas antes de la reunión. Translation services are also available in other languages. Public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. All right. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The city of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya, etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. All right, we have announcements. The city would like to hear from you as we develop a 5-year action plan for Milwaukee's urban renewal area. Weigh in on improvements you would like to see in downtown and central Milwaukee. To join the conversation, visit Engage Milwaukee. Do you know anyone that volunteers and has gone above and beyond in 2021? If so, please consider nominating them for Milwaukee's Volunteer of the Year Award. Learn more and submit a nomination by visiting Engage Milwaukee. The Milwaukie Poetry Series and the Letting Library are once again sponsoring a William Stafford birthday celebration on Saturday, January 8th from 2 to 4 p.m. The event will be held virtually on Zoom. Poems will be shared by featured readers and an open mic will follow. For more information about each of these events and others, please visit the city's homepage, where you will find the city calendar at milwaukieoregon.gov or call 503-786-7555 and staff will provide you with the information you need or connect you with someone who can help. Does anybody else have any other announcements before we continue?
Just a quick addition to remind everyone that for those Volunteer of the Year nominations, you can nominate people who were nominated in prior years. We often have hard decisions. In fact, we have just hard decisions every year. So please do resubmit people who were not chosen the last time if you feel like they are deserving this year.
I would also just throw out there that on Saturday, December 8th is when the North Clackamas Watersheds Council has their tree take back event in North Clackamas Park. And so you can return your Christmas tree, if it's not flocked and it doesn't have tinsel on it, to the Watershed Council, and it'll actually be used in the river to help create fish habitat near Elk Rock Island. So that'll be on, I think it's like 10 to 2 on that Saturday, December 8th in the park, near the picnic shelter in North Clackamas Park.
You're meaning January, right?
Did I say December? Oh yeah, no, I mean January. Yes, I do mean January. Thank you.
After Christmas.
Yes. And I guess this is our last meeting before Christmas. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone out there.
Okay. Our next item is our Student of the Month, Milwaukie High School Outstanding Student Award. And this will be presented as usual by our wonderful principal, Carmen Gellman.
There you go. Sorry. Hi, this is August. Say hi, August. August, I'm so excited to be introducing her to all of you today. August is a senior, and she has just been such a great person at Milwaukie, and she's brought so much joy with everything she does. In August, I sent out an email, like I told you I would, to teachers, and I wanted to read some things that people had to say about you. So bear with me. So August is an extraordinary person. She's smart, witty, kind, and talented in so many ways it's ridiculous. August is a great thinker, writer, actor, director, and they are crafty to boot. I enjoy seeing their projects in the Crochet Club. This is a well-deserved honor for a lovely human being. That's Miss Allison Battistel. She's such a great leader. Whenever I sub in drama or choir and she's in the class, I just step aside and she runs the class exactly as if she were the regular teacher. She's such a joy to be around. Also a supreme actor, Mr. Haugen. August is a bright and shiny star. She is herself unapologetically, and that gives her peers license to do the same. She is not only artistic, but is academically bright and pushes herself to achieve. Her humor and willingness to engage the people around her make her a joy to work with. Miss Marshall. I had August last school year. She had the courage to take AP biology while in distance learning, and she was excellent. August was a leader in class activities and put forth extra effort to ensure the work she completed was of the highest quality. What I enjoy most about August is her curiosity and enthusiasm to understand the natural world. We engaged in intriguing discussions, and I thoroughly enjoyed her participation in class. Miss Matthews. August is one of the most hardworking students I've ever had. She cares a great deal about doing things well, especially as it relates to the arts. She is a skilled actor, singer, and director, and she draws the best out of people, not in a demanding way, but in a kind and inspiring way. She has a passion for social justice and isn't afraid to advocate for others. She has a contagious exuberance for life, performance, and her cat, Charles. August is just the kind of person our world needs right now. Mr. Dolan. Those are just some of the comments that people have said, and I can't read all of them because that would take a long time, but I want you to know and I want you to hear me when I say that I am so grateful that you are in our lives, in my life. And I remember the first time I saw you on stage as a ninth grader and how excited I got. And I thought, oh my God, she's so adorable, because you, when you sing, you put everything, your whole soul, spirit, body into everything that you do. And that started from the first moment I met you and saw you on stage. And I just thought that you brought so much joy to the theater and just who you are as a human being. And I just hope that you see that in yourself. And I'm really grateful for you. Thank you so much for just being who you are, August.
Thank you so much. Those are really sweet messages.
Yeah. And you all have all the stuff about August, right?
Yeah, we do. August, tell us a little bit about what your thoughts for the future are.
Well, I've always been really interested in theater, and that's something I've always wanted to do. But I've also always, I do really like science and math. Specifically, I took calculus this year, and it's just really been interesting. So I think I'm going to take a gap year, like a year off of school to work and get some money for college and stuff. But I am going to apply in case I want to go. And then the end goal is a double major in applied mathematics and musical theater.
I've always been a big fan of gap years. I think I think it benefits young people a lot to be able to take that year off, whether they work or whether they do a little bit of backpacking around the world to see some other cultures. It's a smart thing to do. I applaud that thought. All right, let's let the counselors have a thought to give you. Angel.
Yeah, I would, I'm jealous if you have the opportunity to take a gap year. I would have not been able to take advantage of the very generous benefit of college tuition remission that I had. So I would really strongly encourage you to do that if you can, because I think like the mayor said, it can be, I think that a lot of people, maybe it sounds like you know exactly what you want to do, but you may find that you change your mind and your interests, you grow and you discover something about yourself as you tour the world or work in the workplace or whatever you choose to do in that year. But you're a star, obviously. I mean, everything that everyone is saying about you is really incredible, and you've got the record to prove it. So congratulations to you for all of your achievements. I'm hoping that you can tell me a little bit. I don't think I know what the Pony Pipers are. I'm sorry, that one is new to me. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. So Pony Pipers are just like our show choir at Milwaukie. So we have like the A choir, which is the advanced choir that's kind of traditional. And then Pony Pipers does like pop songs. And sometimes we do like choreography or more like musical theater-y things. It's just kind of like our theater-y choir.
Thank you. Well, good luck to you, and please keep in touch and let us know what you end up doing. And maybe we'll see you in some presentation sometime soon.
Thank you so much.
She's also in the process of directing a play, which I think is in January.
It is. I'm directing A Midsummer Night's Dream right now, which is showing on January 13th, 14th, and 15th, if anyone wants to come see it.
That's cool. That would be fun to come see. Principal Gelman, get us a link to how we do that.
I will do that.
Thank you. Council President Heisey.
Former Queen Titania here. I still have my crown and my flowing cape somewhere in a cedar chest. It's so great to meet you, August. You sound like a wonderful person, and Principal Gelman has an unbroken track record on bringing us wonderful people. And I love that somebody called out that you are unapologetically yourself, and that is really a gift to have this early in your life. And I hope you keep that close and cherish it and can really hold on to that capacity as you move through life, because it gives you a really good foundation from which to be a force for good in the world. That kind of security is a powerful thing. You have so many interests that would strike someone as being wildly divergent. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the way you see a relationship between applied mathematics and musical theater.
Well, yeah, that is a hard one, because I think one of the biggest things that I was like struggling to think about in college was because I really like math and science, but also I love theater. I think that the connection comes in the way that I like to view myself as a creative person who thinks about things in a mathematic way. Like logic-driven creativity, I think, is the way it connects. Because a lot of those same skills that help you apply formulas in math can be what you use to look at certain analysis in theater and stuff, because there's a lot more than just the arts are definitely fun and creative, but also there's a lot of stuff where it's analysis and thinking about things more deeply, and having that mathematical way of looking at stuff can be helpful. I don't know if I explained that very well.
I think you totally did, because I think we often make the mistake of thinking of mathematics as not being creative, and we often make the mistake of thinking of the creative arts as not being analytical. So I love that you see that there is such a strong bridge between the two. So thanks for sharing that with us. It's great to meet you, and good luck.
Thank you.
Who wants to go next? Lisa, go ahead.
I'm happy to go next. It's great to meet you, August. Unfortunately, Council President Heisey took my question. But I see all the passion for theater here, and I will look forward to trying to see your Midsummer Night's Dream. I've been to a few theaters in the Black Box, a few productions in the Black Box before, but it's been several years since I've been there. So I'm glad to know you're back to doing productions. I was going to ask you about the applied mathematics. I'm not sure I actually know what that means, applied mathematics. So maybe you can tell me. I mean, I know kind of what mathematics are, although I did not make it all the way to calculus in my high school career, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, to be honest, I don't 100% know exactly what it is, because the applied mathematics part came in maybe like this month. Like, this plan was not always the plan. Up until like last month, I was just like, I'm just going to do theater. And then I took a math test, and I was like, I just had the most fun ever taking an hour-and-a-half math test. Number one, what a nerd. But number two, like, that's something that's really fun, and I want to explore that as well. So I went to my mom, who's a physicist and knows like math, and I was like, Mom, I think I want to also do math. And we talked about it, and we talked about what I like, and she was like, it sounds like applied mathematics is what you want to do. Because I don't like I like thinking about the theoretical side of things, but the fun that I have is just like working out problems. And that's, from what I understand, mostly applied mathematics.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, I might need to talk to your mom at some point, because I'm looking to take a physics class. That's one of the things I never took in high school or college. And I've always felt like, as I got older, I was like, oh, yeah, I really miss not understanding all the physics concepts. So it's one of my things I plan to do in retirement, is catch up on some classes like that. And so I maybe should ask your mom for where
I could introduce you to her at the play.
There you go. Okay. Okay, great. Well, best of luck to you with the play and with the rest of the year, and with the applications, and with the gap year, because I agree with everyone else. The gap year is a great idea, and several of my friends' kids have done them in recent years, and no one has regretted doing them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Councilor Nicodemus.
Congratulations, August. I would say if you do that gap year, in my opinion, don't use that money on school. There's plenty of money out there. Like, when you're ready to go to school, get a hold of me and I can help you find that money. Just get out there and enjoy everything. I just like everybody else, they talked about your passion for theater. I would follow that as far as it can take you. I would be a proponent of, I don't think you have to go to university to be successful in that. So do it and follow it for as long as you can. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I have to say, I loved your answer to Kathy's question about the combination of the two. And logic-driven creativity is exactly how you make a living in the creative world. Seriously. I mean, the people that do make extraordinary livings, setting aside the super famous actors and actresses, which are a tiny, tiny percentile of the population, the people who do make a living in creative fields are the ones that can solve the logical problems in order to create things, right? And that is actually a rare skill. And I think it has all kinds of applications. You could go all kinds of places with that combination of creativity and the ability to reason out solutions. It's the essence of commercial photography. It's the essence of filmmaking. It's the essence of a lot of things, to be able to do those two things. So you are on track to be whatever you want to be. Very impressive resume, very impressive across the board. I do very much look forward to hearing where you land and where you, you mentioned in this, the thing that we got, that you want to do work around helping your community, helping people find housing and helping people afford things. Again, logic and creativity, right? There's two parts to those problems, and the kind of people who are only doing it from a logic point often miss opportunities. And pure creativity without the ability to reason out a solution also is not super effective. So that would be a world that you could get into and be very powerful and be very effective in it. So I love the way you think and the person you are.
Thank you so much.
All right, Scott, can you put up the plaque or whatever we call those things?
Yep, just a second. Okay, there it is. Everyone see that?
Yep. The City of Milwaukie is proud to recognize for outstanding student achievement in academics, civic engagement, and extracurricular activities at Milwaukie High School, August Weigel. Let it be known to all, on this 21st day of December 2021, the City Council of the City of Milwaukie, a municipal corporation in the County of Clackamas and in the state of Oregon, recognize this student as an excellent example of the bright future of this community and nation. So you will get a copy of that along with a letter signed by me. And I'm going to continue to do this, even though nobody is taking me up on it. If we ever get out of the pandemic, and if you want a picture with me, we used to do that when we had the in-person meetings.
I would love to. I'll definitely be there.
You know what? Let's do it at the play. Tell your mom to bring your camera.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All right, August, thank you. And I hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you after the new year.
Thank you. I'll see you then too.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
So sorry to give you a task, Principal Gelman, but it sounds like council will need, do we buy tickets? I don't even know.
Yep, you buy tickets at the door.
We can't reserve them.
I don't believe so. They're usually sold at the door. So
I don't think we can, no.
So arrive early is what you're saying, because we know this is going to be a sold out show.
yes, we hope. We just had our choir and instrumental together, and it was a collaboration, and it was the most that I've seen, actually. And I think people were I was really excited. They did a wonderful job, and so it was really cool. So I'm sure we'll get the same experience with the play.
Doors open at 6, so you can get them then. But this play doesn't start until 7. So
Until 7.
Cool. All right. We look forward to it.
I'm excited.
But I'll send you all the information about it.
Okay, cool. And do you have other things you want to report to us? No requirement, but.
Yeah, no, I think we're, it was a short month. And so I reported a lot of stuff last month, and we're just continuing on, and we have our shows and our plays and our activities going on. And so that's really awesome. It's fun to be in school when you have your students and you get to watch them in their elements. So that's about it.
All right. Well, you two have outstanding holidays. Enjoy the break. Relax.
Definitely. And you all do the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, Christmas Ships Proclamation. This will be presented by the Christmas Ships Vice President, Dave Kaiser. Dave? You're muted.
There we go. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council President, councilors, and special guests. My name is Dave Kaiser. I'm the Vice President of Christmas Ships again, and this is our 67th year of parading on the Columbia River and the Willamette River. We started out this year on the Columbia, or excuse me, the Willamette on the 7th of December, which was the first night Scott had asked that I come on the meeting and talk about Christmas ships. Unfortunately, being on the river and doing it by cell phone probably wasn't going to be the best idea. So I asked that this be delayed. Unfortunately, this is our last night on the river, and we're not coming to Milwaukie tonight. We attempted to do that last night, but the debris in the river was quite dangerous. And so we limited our parading last night on the Willamette to just south of the spaghetti factory around Willamette Park, and made the turnaround. There were a lot of large logs in that river last night, and I'm told that tonight was a little worse. So I don't know whether or not they actually got off the docks tonight or not. I'm here, so I haven't been able to participate in that. In any event, we're honored that once again, the city of Milwaukie has asked us to come to the council meeting to talk about Christmas ships and to receive the proclamation that you folks have so generously given to us each year for the last several years. Christmas ships, being 67 years old, has seen a lot of time on the water. Much of that time has been in the bowl area, just outside, near this downtown Milwaukie. And our first night, I understand we had a pretty good crowd there. And in fact, on Saturday night, when we made the trip to Milwaukie and then on to Lake Oswego and back, there was also a fairly sizable crowd there. Even though I know the city was not, quote unquote, hosting an event down there, there was a lot of people with a lot of Christmas spirit that were there and showed their appreciation for what we've been doing all these many years. It is, the last 2 years have been tough on Christmas ships, as they have been on all of you and all the people of the city of Milwaukie. We were able to parade in 2000, and obviously parading in 2020 and 2021. And we look forward to doing it far into the future. And we hope to continue the relationship we have with your city. The people have been extraordinary in expressing both their physical presence and also their comments to us by Facebook and emails, and making contributions to help defray some of the costs for insurance and other things that the Christmas ships maintains. So again, thank you to all of the people of the city of Milwaukie, and particularly to the people on the council for your generous efforts that you've given to us these many years.
Well, I have to say, I think we were all sad to have to cancel Solstice once again. I think for many of us, that's our favorite city event. And the Christmas ships are, of course, a huge, huge part of that. And so hopefully next year, the world will be a little bit closer back to normal, and we can have that event again.
We look forward to it, Mayor.
Whereas the Christmas Ships Parade is a 67-year-old tradition And whereas the Christmas ships will sail to destinations on the Columbia and Willamette rivers between December 3rd and December 21st, 2021. And whereas the Christmas ships will sail to Milwaukie Bay on December 7th, 10th, 15th, 17th, 18th, 20th, and 20th, 2021. And whereas the city of Milwaukie wishes to thank the Christmas ships for bringing their annual floating parades to and through Milwaukie Bay. Now, therefore, I, Mark Gamba, Mayor of the City of Milwaukie, a municipal corporation in the County of Clackamas in the state of Oregon, do hereby proclaim December 3rd through December 21st, 2021 as Christmas Ships Days in Milwaukie, and hereby extends the city's warmest wishes for a successful parade season. Sorry, that's almost over. All right. Well, thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully earlier, before the event.
We'll do our best to try to get it in before the season is over with.
Yeah.
You could come in November even,
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the past invitations, this one, as well as future ones, and I look forward to meeting with you folks again someday. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, city manager and in-person meetings update.
So last meeting, we talked about whether or not we were going to come back in person. And since that, we have learned a lot about Omicron, but not nearly enough. So this is a chance for you all to talk about whether or not you want to continue online, or if you'd like to try and come back in person, or if you want to wait, or what that looks like for all of you. I feel like you're really excited to talk about this again.
So I'll start out and give everybody a chance to, we've got important hearings coming up. I recognize that it's an unknown time. I recognize that we don't know yet what the dangers are. So obviously, I think we're going to have to play it by ear to a certain degree, and I think that just goes without saying in this day and age. But my preference, my leaning would be to be back in person, particularly because of those hearings. If it's safe to do so, if we're not putting the staff at risk, if we're not putting citizens that would come to testify at risk. That's my preference. Lisa.
I agree with that entirely. I am a little concerned about the idea of doing the hearings without people being able to testify in person. So I heard from a couple people that they knew people who weren't able to testify before the Planning Commission for various reasons. So I don't want that to be an impediment for the rest of the hearing. So I'm in agreement with what you just said, Mr. Mayor.
Kathy.
This is tough because the way the question was phrased, city manager, no, I'm not, I do not want to continue meeting virtually. That said, I'm still not clear on what is the standard that safe constitutes in this day and age, and that seems to still be evolving. If we are going to meet in person, I think I would, as horrible as it is to do hybrid meetings with staff absent, I think I would actually prefer to do whatever we could to minimize the number of people in chambers. And if that means that we have staff presenting virtually, that would be, that's one way to do it. If we could have public testimony, because I do agree that I don't want to preclude that option for the public on the magnitude of the things we're discussing. Would there be a way to do that from the garage bay and have it be virtual in some fashion so that we're, again, limiting the number of people and we could have the bay window or the bay doors open? I'm just trying to figure out ways we could be creative, prevent people experiencing a super spreader event or even a spreader event, given that it's not a huge number of people, but with the part where we don't know vaccine status for folks, and that should not be a requirement for someone to come and provide public testimony. And the part where I feel like I'm sick today and I wonder what I've got makes me feel like this is uncharted territory, and I want us to be responsible and careful.
I'm probably planning on, I'm going to follow at least my office reopening, and that's been delayed by at least a couple, a few weeks as we continue to learn more. And so I'm certainly a strong, I've sort of advocated all along, and now, we should, I think, prepare for hybrid meeting. And I think that this next, at least the next couple, will give us an opportunity to test out those capabilities. We need to provide that opportunity anyway. So I will plan on attending virtually. And I think if I am, then I would hope that, as Council President Heisey said, I think I would like to explore the option of allowing others to attend remotely and to contribute remotely as well, whether that's staff or folks coming in or contributing online and providing testimony online.
Well, I think we actually have to do that under state law now, right?
Well, I know we have to for participants. I'm not sure that we have to for staff. I don't think that that's required.
And you have to, for participants, it's that you have to allow for people to have a virtual option. It's not, if we were all virtual, you don't have to create an in-person option. So that's the only flip to that statement. Councillor, thank you, Councillor Faulkner. Councillor Nicodemus, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm okay with coming in until it's not okay.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So that's my 2 cents.
So we have a meeting on January 4th, I believe. Is that right? 6th, 4th, somewhere? 4th. Okay. So for right now, we are going to do it as a hybrid meeting. That means that I'm going to give staff the choice about whether or not they're going to be there in person or whether or not they're going to be online. I'm also going to go into the room and I'm going to look at distancing and spacing. Because I don't think Justin, Scott, and I can all sit in there at the same time. So we'll figure that out for that part of the staff side. Thank you, Scott, for the visual of that. I also want to put out there that we have a retreat. We have a retreat where it's typically not the public, but it is typically this group for a couple hours on Saturday, that next Saturday. So that would be January 8th. The public's welcome to come. I don't want to dissuade anybody from coming, but we typically don't have an audience or a big audience because it's more about vision for this team. So we are trying to figure that out. We have reserved the council chambers. We can make that call up until the day before. So if you all decide you want to do that online, that's fine. I will leave it in person for right now, and we can make that decision as we hit that point. And we're going to have to go for a week-by-week basis. I will say to Scott, just because I know he's sitting here in a little trepidation, because this is a lot to try and test out in a public hearing. So just no, we're going to do our best. We're going to do everything we can to make this meeting run, but we're going to be using new technology in a very diverse way, or a pulled apart team, basically, to try and make it happen. So to the public, if you're having issues and you're unable to get in, we have an OCR website. Email address. Scott will read that at the beginning of the meeting. If you are having issues online, you're welcome to come in at that point. We'll figure some out. So I'm going to call this as, yes, we're going to try and do the 4th as a hybrid. We're going to keep the retreat open as a possible in person. just as a possible, not that it is or isn't. We will make that call the day before because we can. And then we'll see how we feel on this meeting, because the next one's actually the hearing. So this one isn't, the 4th is not the hearing. It's just a public meeting. The next one's the hearing. So we'll have to play all those pieces. And then I'm giving staff some options about where they sit and making sure that they have some autonomy in their choices. Okay.
Can we make sure that staff also provides a phone number to call in? Because I think that the people who are having a challenge testifying online are probably also people who are not communicating by email. And I want to make sure that we're providing an opportunity for folks who just don't do online to be a part of what we're trying to do.
He is nodding.
Absolutely. The link information I post on the meeting pages always includes all of the Zoom phone numbers for a myriad of zip codes or area codes. So yes, there'll always be a phone number.
Yeah, and it's just that you need to read those at the beginning of the meeting for anyone who's, yeah, you got it.
I'll add that to the script, Mr. Mayor, so that it prompted to, yeah.
So,
Maybe we could even have a slide or something that goes across the bottom of the screen with both the phone and the email, just to make them more visible to people during the course of a meeting and not, yeah.
I'll mention that to our AV folks to they do this, the reader at the bottom. I'll ask them to do that.
Does anybody happen to know if our surfaces can have a second monitor attached to them? Yes?
I use a second monitor during our meetings right now.
Yep, me too.
Okay, cool. If the council itself is hybrid, then I'm thinking that I may need that at the desk just to be able to have the packet and be able to see everybody and all the things. So for whatever that's worth.
One thing that would be really helpful as we go into that meeting is also if you would email Scott and let him know which you are planning. So if you're planning to be online versus in person, it would just help us for the setup and also to make sure we have the right tech support to you. So if you could keep that in mind as we're getting ready, that'd be great.
And in terms of our study session, which this month was a trip, we're still planning on that.
The Grand Ron has gotten back to us with confirmation this week. So again, we'll have to play that as we find out more and as we see how widely and quickly Omicron is spreading and what the impacts are to public spaces and meetings.
Omicron, and it's going to be mid-January. The weather could also impact that.
It never snows in Portland, Scott. Nope, that's what I was told when I moved here. You all lied.
This is a heck of a week for you to be testing your fate, considering the forecast.
Totally. Okay. Yes. Just so people on air know, I used to work in Park City, Utah. I'm used to snow. It's not the snow. It's just the snowplows of Oregon. Okay. With that, I'm going to stop. I did not have any comments to report from last meeting. So with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you. So community comments. This is a part of the agenda during which council will hear community members' statements regarding city business. Those wishing to speak, please email ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov or raise your hand in Zoom or write a comment in the Zoom chat that you wish to speak. Before you make your comments, please state your name and city of residence for the record. If you would like the city to follow up with you, please submit your contact information to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. As council has other business items on the agenda this evening, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Because information provided during community comment may be new, the city manager will respond at the next council meeting to those comments that require follow-up. Scott, do we have any?
We'll check in the email and looking at the chat. I don't see any, Mr. Mayor.
All right. If somebody pops up while we're doing consent agenda, let me know. Tonight's consent agenda includes the minutes of the City Council from November 9th, 2021 study session, November 16th, 2021 work session, and November 16th, 2020 regular session. A resolution authorizing a grant agreement with Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development to develop a housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy. Does any member of council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. Motion passes unanimously. Next up is a business item. It's the annexation of 5880 Hector Street, file number A-2021-002. This will be presented by our senior planner, Brett Kelver.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Gamba and councilors. It's good to see you this evening. Brett Kelver, Senior Planner with the City Planning Department. And we'll keep it short and sweet for both of these. 5880 Southeast Hector Street is a property in the Northeast Sewer Extension area. It has made an emergency connection to sewer, and we have taken it through the process for expedited annexation.
If there are no questions, I would entertain a motion. Lisa.
I actually do have a question. When you say emergency connection, that means something was failing? Yeah.
Well, potentially, yeah. We use that phrase. I guess maybe a better way to say it would be we allowed them to connect to the sewer before they completed the annexation process. That the two primary reasons that we might do that are, one, that they have a septic system that is failing. The other is there have been cases where a property is in the process of being sold, and one of the conditions of the sale is that it connect to the sewer. And so we have allowed, I guess, an emergency connection to the sewer in those cases as well, so that the sale can proceed and we get the necessary commitments for the annexation, the payment of the SDCs, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. That was my question, because I thought that was often the case. We often see in the paperwork that the house is in the process of changing hands or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just take the opportunity to go ahead and ask the question now. Brett, I love seeing you always. Really appreciate the brief presentation. Wonderful. I'm still curious about how we avoid having a hearing for these things. And we don't have to answer that question. We talked about it, I think, at some length last time. I guess I would want to know, if could this process potentially derail someone's sale? If for some reason this council were to say, nope, we reject this, then someone is in the process of trying to sell their home. Maybe there's, some financial hardship, and this really, really would put a pretty crappy damper on maybe their Christmas plans or ability to make ends meet. That's, to me, a pretty significant reason to maybe try to figure out a more streamlined way. I mean, these things, we never obstruct these things. We always pass them. But here we are with the opportunity, and I'm not planning on taking it, but.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It might depend some case to case in terms of the timing of the sale mechanism. Because sometimes sales can happen fairly quickly, within a couple of weeks, and usually we're at least, it seems like 4 or 5 weeks from the time we take in the annexation application to the time we actually get to a city council meeting for it, at least 4 or 5 weeks. And we have a 20-day notice that we send out kind of at the bare minimum. And it seems to me, my limited experience from some of the ones that have been that sale situation is that, the main I'm just kind of thinking through this. The main point there for the buyer and seller is to get the house connected to sewer, which is actually able to happen fairly quickly. Once they, provide us with the application materials, sign the consent to annex form, we give them the necessary paperwork for them to go to the county, because the county still has jurisdiction to get the plumbing permit to connect. And so then pretty quickly, I think the property is connected to the sewer. And my guess is that often the sale, is able to resolve itself probably. And there may be a case where something throws it off and it delays it. But then I guess the question of, once it's connected to sewer, if that was one of the conditions of the sale, there is this agreement that they've signed to follow through with the annexation process. And I guess if it was the council that rejected the effort, I don't know. I don't know what the city attorney thinks, but it kind of seems like, they've at least followed through on their end of it by going through the process to annex. So I'm not sure that, I think that's a really good question, but I'm not sure that if the council did decide not to accept an annexation, whether it would, I think it's highly unlikely it would throw off a sale, because I think one thing, the sale has probably already happened by the time it gets to you. And I don't know that you rejecting their annexation request would violate, wouldn't mean they violated any terms of an agreement. What do you think, Justin?
That is a good question, Counselor. I've never looked at it from that angle about rejection. We typically want to encourage annexation, particularly in these outlying pieces. One point, though, about your initial question is this actually isn't a public hearing. This is a business item. And it's our code that requires us to adopt an ordinance when we do annexations. So that we'd have to look into whether or not there's a code. We need to fix the code, assuming that when the code was adopted, there was a reason they chose the vehicle of an ordinance to change the annexation map. I'm not sure whether moving away from that process has any unintended consequences. We would have to look through that. The applicable statute for annexation in the expedited process allows the process to happen by resolution. And so we might find that that is a vehicle that works. I know when we last spoke about this, we talked about doing them all in a batch or doing a bunch at once or something. I'm not certain how, one property might be messed up and another property go forward. How does that mix up the resolution or the ordinance if we have multiples attached? So those are all issues we'll need to analyze.
Tonight is a short night. At least on this matter, we did before previously, and the last time this happened, I think we had, a few, so it took a little bit longer. I don't know. Am I the only one who thinks that, we should probably look into a code change to do these by resolution? We've never had a problem. We've never stood in the way of these things. We do encourage annexation. We've got annexation, built into our comp plan in terms of trying to get people to annex into, who are in our UGMA. Do I get a second on looking at this to try to fix it?
Well, I think, if there's no state law impediment, I guess I assumed there was some of this was state law requirements about annexation, because the state law is pretty prescriptive about annexation generally. But if there's no state law requirement, I suspect these ones that are part of a negotiated agreement with the county are different than just a one-off annexation that might come from some other part of our border, like the community college one or whatever. But yeah, if there's a more streamlined way to do it, it makes sense to me to do it. And it goes along with the point I made before about in the beginning, there were batches. They came, they were people were given an incentive, and they got a reduced fee or something to do it all up front. And I just wonder now as we whittle away at the numbers, would an incentive get us to get them batched and in and done and be over with all this? But
yeah, it certainly warrants scratching the surface a little bit more. I don't know the intermix between the Metro Code, our code, and the state statute, finding out and making sure that there's not a hole that things fall through if we use a different process, because it's all kind of tied together. So we need to scratch that a little bit more to find out. I did look at the statute, and it appears to allow, in this context, the map to be amended via resolution or ordinance. For whatever reason, whenever this code was adopted, it adopted an ordinance rather specifically as the vehicle. So we might look at historically why that was and what's changed, if anything, since then, and how that affects how we record and finalize the annexations.
Yeah, if it could just be a resolution that we pass in the consent agenda, boom, 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 that'd be great. That said, we have higher priorities. So if this is going to eat up a bunch of somebody's time that keeps them from doing other things, let's be cognizant of that. But if this is a quickie, easy solution, sure.
Well, then I would move, or I would make a motion I move for the first and second readings by title only and adoption of the ordinance annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DD05600 and located at 5880 Southeast Hector Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-002.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded for the first and second readings by title only and adoption of the ordinance annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E3DD05600 and located at 5880 Southeast Hector Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-002. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Ms. Ober, would you read the ordinance by title only twice?
An ordinance of the city of Milwaukie, Oregon, annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DD05600 and located at 5880 Southeast Hector Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-002. And again, an ordinance of the city of Milwaukie, Oregon, annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DD05600 and located at 5880 Southeast Hector Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-002.
Mr. Stoffer, would you please poll the council?
Councillor Falconer.
Aye.
Councillor Beatty.
Aye.
Councillor Nicodemus.
Aye.
Council President Heisey.
Aye.
Mayor Gamba.
Aye.
Motion carried 5-0, ordinance 2211.
All right, and here we go. Annexation of 5911 Willow Street, file number A-2021-005. Mr. Kelber.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Similar situation. This is a property in the Northeast sewer extension area that has made a connection to sewer already and committed to follow through with the annexation process. So I'll ask if there are any questions about this one.
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I can make a motion. First and second readings by title only and adoption of the ordinance annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DA09702 and located at 5911 Southeast Willow Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-005.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded for first and second readings by title only and adoption of the ordinance annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DA09702 and located at 5911 Southeast Willow Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-005. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? None heard. The motion passes unanimously. Ms. Ober, would you please read the title only twice?
An ordinance of the city of Milwaukie, Oregon, annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DA09702 and located at 5911 Southeast Willow Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-005. Again, an ordinance of the city of Milwaukie, Oregon, annexing a tract of land identified as tax lot 1S2E30DA09702 and located at 5911 Southeast Willow Street into the city limits of the city of Milwaukie, file number A-2021-005.
Mr. Staffer, would you please poll the council?
Counselor Falconer,
Aye.
Counselor Beatty,
Aye.
Counselor Nicodemus,
Aye.
Council President Heisey,
Aye.
Mayor Gamba.
Aye.
Motion carried 5-0. Ordinance 2212.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett. Happy holidays.
To you all as well. Take care.
Thanks. Okay, next up we have the chief, Chief Luke Straight, giving us statistical transparency of policing, which is also known as STOP data report. Chief.
Good evening, Mayor Gamba, council, and members of our community. I'm Chief Luke Straight with the Milwaukie Police Department. As Mayor Gamba mentioned, I'm here this evening to introduce members of the state's Criminal Justice Commission, who will be giving an annual briefing or update on our STOP data program. And as Mayor Gamba mentioned, that's the state's statistical transparency of policing. The executive director, Ken Sandgren, and research director, Kelly Officer, were kind enough to join us this evening. And we all know how busy December is for everyone. So thank you so much for joining us here. They provided a similar briefing last year at this time, and we can't thank them enough for joining us. So I'd like to just turn it over to Ken and Kelly.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Sandgren, the Executive Director of the CJC. Yes, my colleague Kelly, Officer, will hopefully be joining us this evening. She's been furiously texting me saying that she's been having some pretty significant internet issues at her home this evening. But if she doesn't join us, you'll just have to suffer through with me for the entire presentation. So real quick, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it'll be the correct one. And then I'll go ahead and begin. Can everybody see a title slide, Statistical Transparency Policing? Perfect. And feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions, though I'll note that I can't see everybody in the current view that I have. So feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions as we go along. Thank you, Chief Straight, for the introduction. As he mentioned, I did appear in front of you all previously outlining what our program does here at the state, the STOP program. And so I'll have a very brief introduction since we've gone through a lot of this before, and we'll get right to the results. Okay. So just as a quick reminder, the Statistical Transparency of Policing program was created by House Bill 2355 in 2017. Over the past 4 years, we have worked through onboarding all of Oregon's law enforcement agencies, so that now we have almost 170 law enforcement agencies who are reporting into our data system. And what they're reporting on is all officer-initiated discretionary traffic and pedestrian stops. So that means that a traffic stop or an interaction between officers and the public that is in response to a call for service, so when somebody actually calls the agency for help or assistance of some type, those are not included in our data. Rather, what we have here are encounters between police and individuals within the city of Milwaukee that are initiated by those officers. And when one of those stops occur, officers are required statutorily to record certain pieces of information. And that includes information about when and where the stop occurred, so the date, the time, location, the reason for the stop, what happened during the stop, and then certain demographic factors associated with the individual who is stopped, including their race, their age, and their gender. One of the other tasks that we were given at the commission by 2355 for this program was to select an appropriate methodology for examining stop outcomes based on best practices. Historically, what has been used over the past 30 to 35 years are what are known as benchmark analyses. And what I have here is what would represent a benchmark analysis for the city of Milwaukee had this been the sole analytical approach that we had chosen. But what has been shown over many years, especially in the academic area, is that simply doing a benchmark comparison, which is where you take stop data and compare it to some other measure of a population within a city, like census data, is that those types of analyses are often biased or invalid themselves. And that can be because perhaps the comparison categories are not always the same or similar. So for example, you can actually see on the chart here that while the stop data program collects information on individuals' races, they're not an option for a multiracial individual or an individual who identifies as two or more races to be entered into the data. This is an issue that is of growing importance, as we've seen in the census data over the past few cycles. There has been a growing share of individuals across the country who identify as multiracial. And so that means there's some incongruency between our data categories and the comparison cases we're trying to make. In addition, we know that the individuals who are driving on our city's streets do not necessarily match our residential census population. And that has been an issue that has only been exacerbated during the COVID-19 era. I work for the state, and we just had our work from home order extended. So it means that I have been working from home for nearly 2 years now, which means that I don't really contribute to the driving population of anywhere at the moment, unfortunately, as much as I would like to be out and about, because I sit here in my room every day instead of commute to work. So for those reasons and many others, what we selected at the Justice Commission follows the academic research, and as I mentioned, best practices, as far as how we do these different analyses. And the analyses that we have instead employed beyond these benchmarks are 3 different types of approaches, one of which is called the veil of darkness, that looks at the decision to stop a driver, and then 2 of which that look at what happens once that stop has been made. The first one is called the predicted disposition analysis, and that looks at who is cited, searched, or arrested. And then the second one is the KPT hit rate, which looks at the share of successful searches that occur when law enforcement officers actually conduct a discretionary search on an individual during a traffic stop. Before I move on and begin to present the results of these analyses, I do want to note that none of these approaches, whether our benchmark analysis or the ones that we use in our study, none of these approaches are perfect. None of them can prove or disprove discrimination. What we try to do with our statistical models is to try to determine whether there is a disparity according to those models. And then we ask questions of agencies when we have identified disparities. And I do see that we have a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I actually have 2 questions. One is short, I think. I just want to make sure that when you say successful, the share of successful searches, you mean a search in which some sort of contraband was found?
That is correct.
Is that what you mean by successful? Okay.
Exactly.
And then the predicted disposition, I looked through your report comparing different, all the different jurisdictions, and I was having trouble really understanding what that is, how the prediction is reached. And then, obviously I see the result comes from your data, but how is the predicted disposition reached? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
That is a great question. And I thank you because you have perfectly transitioned to my next slide. So actually what I'll do, I'll move on. But hopefully then with that information, I'll be able to answer your questions and provide some clarity. So I'll just pause a moment to see if there are any questions about this slide before I move on, and then I can address that question on the next one. Hearing no one else or seeing no hands, I will pop down. So now what we'll talk about is, after that introduction, we'll talk about our results that we were able to obtain, and I will start with the predicted disposition. So the outcomes that we're looking at for the predicted disposition, as I mentioned, that is searches, citations, and arrests. And what we use from a formal standpoint is a statistical model called propensity score matching. I won't really talk about that any more than just mentioning it. But what propensity score matching allows us to do is it allows us to match similar individuals who basically share the same characteristics that we have in our data in every way, except they differ on race. And so what that means, we can see this list of variables that we have here. It would mean that what we want to do is we want to compare, we'll use me as an example, a 40-year-old white man who is perhaps stopped on a Tuesday evening around 7 o'clock for speeding, let's say 5 to 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. We would then compare me, or a person like me, to a 40-year-old Hispanic man, for example, who was stopped on a Tuesday evening around 7 o'clock in the evening for speeding 5 to 10 miles over the limit. And what we would expect is that on average, when we're able to match all of these different individuals together across an entire agency, on average, their outcomes should be the same. Will they always be the same? Not necessarily, but on average, they should be. And so what we're hoping to do is, by comparing, and we'll see this on the next slide, the actual outcomes for our Hispanic individuals, for example, or for our Black individuals, for example, to a matched white group, we would hope that those outcomes would be pretty close to being the same, or at least not statistically significantly different. And that's what we take as a measure of disparities. So this is not true for the city of Milwaukee, but again, maybe it's a good example. We have found some agencies, for example, to where the search rate, the gap between searches that are conducted on similar white individuals to whatever minority group we're talking about here, is half of what we actually observe for that minority group. That's where we begin getting very concerned. If we would expect a minority group search rate to only be 4%, but they are searched 8% of the time, that's very concerning. So it's when you begin to look and see these gaps between what we would expect for our similarly situated white folks to our comparison groups, that's where we become concerned and begin to do a little bit of digging. And I see we have a question from the council president.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding this and explicate it for anyone who's watching. So the Milwaukie PD, in comparison to other similar cities, has a higher percentage of stops that result in nothing or a warning, and lower citation, search, and arrest percentages. Is that correct?
Yes, just overall. Okay. Yes,
overall. Yes. Right.
Yes, right. Compared to other tier 2 agencies.
Right.
And interestingly, what we've seen across the state is that share of citations, it varies widely. On the lower end, we might see a citation rate of around 15%, but we have an agency in the state, it happens to be in the county where I reside, where the citation rate is 85%. And so don't speed in Marion County. But that's something kind of unique to them. Most are not that close. But yes, that is correct. We wanted to provide a comparison to comparable agencies, and not the really big ones, not the really tiny ones for you all. So hopefully, Councilor Beatty, that answered or clarified a little bit of what we're talking about with the disposition as well. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll move on to the results, and then hopefully that will also begin to show what we found and add a little bit of background as to what we're doing here. So the way that we read these outcomes is that, and again, I'm using the Hispanic comparison here, is that the actual column that we see here for each of these different types of outcomes, that's just what we see in the raw data. In the actual data itself, 38.8% of Hispanic stops result in a citation. So there's no data processing, there's nothing special going on there. The predicted column, that's the one that takes some of the statistical wizardry to do. And so what we're saying is that for similarly situated white people who match our Hispanic group on all of those different characteristics, we would expect Hispanics to be cited around 37.5% of the time. What we saw was they were cited 38.8% of the time. However, that gap is not statistically significant, nor are any of the gaps that we see across the predicted disposition, which means that at least in this case, when Milwaukie Police Department officers, after they've stopped an individual and they actually come up to the window and they begin to go through whatever enforcement mechanism they are enacting, they treat folks equally as far as our analyses are concerned. And I see a couple hands. I'm not sure if one is left over from before, but I'll take any questions you all have.
Lisa, go ahead.
So this is, I guess, where I was confused by looking at your charts is the predicted column. I guess I don't understand why that number isn't the same if it's based on extrapolating from the white population, then why isn't the predicted percentage the same for all the categories here?
Because they are matching individuals in that comparison group. And so the same white folks may not match the same Asian folks or may not match the same Hispanic folks. Each of those groupings is unique because of the characteristics of the individuals who were stopped. And so hopefully that answers your question, but it's almost as if you run this test multiple times with multiple comparison groups. We have to find the group of white individuals within your city that best match your Hispanic group, and then there's a slightly different group that best matches the Middle Eastern stops, and a slightly different group, and so on and so on.
So are you looking at each Middle Eastern stop individually and finding how many matches, or you're somehow classifying all of them as a group?
Well, sure. The algorithm actually does classify them as a group, but inside of that algorithm, it's finding the best matches collectively. But the overall idea that I presented in the beginning, that we're looking for another 40-year-old, either Middle Eastern or Hispanic man, we're trying to match those folks as best we can. So in the end, each group should look the same to one another, at least according to the variables that we have.
Okay, thank you.
But at least the upshot of what we have here is that the treatment that we've found, sometimes we actually will see, for example, that our predicted rate, for example, for citations for Black or African-American individuals, our predicted rate was actually higher than it ended up being. Regardless, though, like I said, none of these are statistically significant. So we had no concerns for the city. The second analysis that we run on post-op outcomes is called the KPT hit rate analysis. And this one is a good bit more straightforward. All it does is it compares successful search rates across different racial groups. And again, as was pointed out earlier, a successful search is just one where some type of contraband is found. And so what we would like to see is that groups of individuals. I know that we have a limited time today, so I'll skip a little bit of what I have on the slide, just to mention that at least in this instance, the STOP program was not able to even run the KPT hit rate analysis for the city of Milwaukie. And that's because the city did not conduct enough discretionary police stops over the 2-year period to be included. In fact, if I look back to my notes, over the last 2 years, the city police department conducted 6 searches. 5 of them were of white individuals, and they actually had a 0% success rate for those folks. And one was of a Black or African-American individual, and they did find contraband in that case for 100% success rate. And so, but those do not meet the standard that we would require for a sufficient number of stops to actually do those comparisons. And right now, I will just ask, since I can't see, like I said, everybody. I'm not sure if my colleague Kelly has been able to join us. Looks like there you are.
She's there.
I I'm here if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
So I'll
Excellent.
slide and then I will turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I had some technical difficulties. You think this would all be worked out by now, but hiccups come up. Especially as the computer wants to not recognize certain programs and all of that. So thank you for having me. My name is Kelly Officer. I work with Ken. I'm the research director at the CJC, and I'm going to present the next couple slides. So next up, we have the Veil of Darkness model. This is looking at the rate of traffic stops in daylight compared to darkness. And so if stops are being made in a race neutral manner, we should see similar rates of stops in this comparison. We are restricting our window here. It's the inter-twilight window. We'll go through that here in the visual. So the population should be similar at these times of day. It generally coincides with morning and evening commute times. We do have a link there on the screen. We have a interactive online data dashboard. And so you can go to that dashboard and kind of look at this view. You can also look at other agencies and a few different filters. But each dot on the chart is a specific traffic stop. And so you can actually hover over that and it'll show you the month and the approximate time of day of the stop. And then the color coding here shows whether it was light or dark, and then also the race of the driver that was stopped for that comparison. Ken, let's see if our animation comes up here. Yay. So the horizontal axis here is the time of year. So we've got stops from July 2020 to June 2021, so the year of stops. And then on the vertical axis, we have the time of day. So you can see there in the middle, we have a bunch of grayed out stops. Those are the stops right in the middle of the day when it's always light outside. Those are not included in this model that we're doing. And then similarly, the stops at night when it's always dark are also not included. Let's see. So what we are looking at are these particular windows. So we have a morning window here where you can see at certain times of the year, it tends to be light. Then at other times of the year, it will be dark based on that variation. And then same thing with the evening stops. Let's see, I made myself some notes. So that morning window is from about 5 a.m. to 7:30. And then that evening window is from about 4:30 to 9:30. So good timing today, shortest day of the year. I was driving at about 4:45 today and it was dark. But in April, when I'm driving at that time, it would be light outside. And so we're only comparing stops at that time of day and comparing whether it is light or dark outside in making those comparisons. I can see everything, but I can't really see. All I see is Ken. And so if there's any hands up or any questions, others feel free to jump in and interrupt me.
That's
excellent. Okay. All right. So that was just kind of setting up the model. So here we're getting into the results. So in our, I'm sure Ken mentioned that our report was released December 1 of this year. So for Milwaukie, we did find a difference for the rate of Black drivers being stopped in daylight compared to darkness. And so in the report, we display odds ratios for this comparison. And so the statistical model is looking at these odds ratios here. So for Milwaukie, what we found is that the odds of stops for Black drivers in daylight is about 2.7 times the odds for white drivers. And that difference was statistically significant. So if the rate of Black drivers in daylight compared to darkness was exactly the same as white drivers, that odds ratio would be 1.0. And so it was significantly higher than 1.0. You can see we have here for Latinx or Hispanic drivers, it was about close to 1.6. So that is higher than the 1.0, but that difference was not statistically significant. That was in the range of what we would expect to see, just given the variation in the data. So we did not find a difference for Latinx or Hispanic drivers, but did find a difference for Black drivers in the model. This model is doing, it's looking at this difference. It's also comparing for, or it's also accounting for differences in the other information that we have. So we have the day of week, time of day, obviously, and the age and gender of the stopped driver. So for the additional information that we have, we're accounting for all of those factors. And then after accounting for those factors, this is the difference that we're finding in that rate of the stopped drivers. Now I know odds ratio 730 is not the easiest thing. So here we have an additional table to kind of show the difference that the model is showing here. So these are the stops in those veil of darkness windows, so both the morning and evening window for black and white drivers. So just at those particular times of day, for black drivers, about 60% of the stops are when it was light outside, and conversely 40% when it was. And for white drivers, you can percentage of stops when it's light outside is lower. It's 53%, and then 47% when it is dark. So we're seeing a difference there in the rate of stopped drivers when it is light outside for black and white drivers. Now, this is just a summary measure. The odds ratios from the full statistical model that's accounting for all the other factors as well. But this gives you an idea of the difference that the model is finding in that rate of stopped drivers. And then I have one more table. This one really focuses on the evening stops. The morning, you kind of see it from that earlier chart too. There were fewer stops in the morning. It was really the evening stops where the difference was showing up in the data. So here for the evening stops, we see for black drivers that about 57% of those stops were when it was light, with nearly 43% when it was dark. But for white drivers, it was really close to a 50-50. So again, it's that difference that the model is finding in the rate of stops when it's light versus dark outside. And that is our final data slide. And I'm sure Ken and I will be happy to take questions.
Yeah, I'm looking at those numbers and I'm trying to do the math in my head, and Slate, and I can't do it. So how many stops, physical stops, does that percentile difference represent?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll kind of that table on the upper right hand side that has veil of darkness stops. It is 113 stops for black drivers in that window. So if you do, I'm not good at math in my head, statistician who can't do math in my head, but 60% of 113, that would be the number of stops occurring when it's light. And then conversely, the rest would be when it was dark.
So like if there were 7 less stops, it would be even. I'm not doing the math well either, so
sure.
Nobody hold me to my math, but that's my
sure.
Seat of the
there is math. Yes. So I will say these are stops that only occur in those windows, so the morning and evening windows. So 113 doesn't sound like a lot of stops, but the difference that we're seeing here is large enough that it is showing up as significant in the model, and so. Even after we account for all those other factors, we're still seeing this difference. It's not a lot of stops though, right? And so, it's not, Ken and I were chatting about this earlier today, it's not, you're not going to have a huge change that's going to impact thousands of stops to be able to work on what we're finding here in this data, right? You've got 113 total. You really are going to have some proportion of that shifting to happening when it's dark instead of light, or not happening. And so, yeah, the number of stops where something would need to be done differently is not a large number.
Yeah, well, so that was part of my question. The other part of it was just, I mean, I've read enough polling and understood enough of the math on statistics and polling, and that this number, I don't know, is it, I guess at what point do you guys say, well, there's not enough data here to give us a statistical certainty?
Sure. No, that's a very good question. You saw from when Ken went through the predicted disposition, we actually had results there for all 5 non-white groups that are in the stop data. Here we just have for Black and Hispanic drivers. So we did not have enough data for Middle Eastern, Native, or Asian drivers to be able to do this analysis for those drivers. We were able to do it for Black and Hispanic drivers. For Black, we really were just above the cutoff we would need to be able to do the test. And so, had we had 90 total stops instead of 113, I'm not sure, we probably would not have been able to do this result. So we really are just barely able to do it. But that being said, we're also finding a large enough difference in that to find this result.
Okay.
If I could just jump in, and I think that what Kelly is mentioning is kind of the duality of this result is that on some level, this is something that with a small sample, it has risen to the level of statistical significance where we are concerned about this. But as you mentioned, the difference
You're kind of breaking
small.
out, Ken.
Oh, I apologize. Hopefully, can you hear me a little bit better now?
Try it again.
Sorry. Well, maybe I'll let Counselor Nicodemus ask his question, and then maybe my bandwidth will be a little bit better.
This isn't so much a question as it is a comment. This doesn't surprise me. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of Black people in Oregon to begin with. And then we're talking about Black people are almost 3 times more likely to get pulled over. As a Black man who's been pulled over multiple times for fitting a description, none of this surprises me. It just shows that there's still a ton of implicit bias out there, and we still have a lot of work to do around that implicit bias. And if I can make a suggestion, can you think about changing the name of Veil of Darkness? Because it rings home to me of like sundown laws. And I know you all don't decide on this, but Veil of Darkness as a Black man sounds really whack, right? When we're looking at Black people are being pulled over at this certain time. I mean, it doesn't sit right with me. And I'm just one person, but that's my suggestion.
I'll just say thank you very much for sharing that, and just a reminder of how that resonates with you. I think we'll address that. The research literature really uses this VOD, Veil of Darkness, but we'll definitely
I understand all
work on that.
And if we're looking at this form right here, I'm the only Black person, right? And so how does this sit with me? And if it sits with me this way, I mean, if we had a lot more Black people here, it could go a different way. And once again, I totally understand it's not you all deciding that it's called VOD, but it just, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's whack.
I appreciate that feedback, and I appreciate you kind of sharing how that sits with you at first glance. I think that's really important.
And I'd like to say the same thing. I appreciate that feedback very much, but I also want to emphasize one other part of the comment that you made, Counselor, and that's that due to the fact that we have so few persons of color, and especially Black or African-American individuals in Oregon, oftentimes these differences that we find, they appear to be small, yet they are significant, both statistically and meaningful in magnitude. And I think that it's something that we need to keep in mind, being in a state that has such a small share of some of these groups. But I will mention that the positive, and we've seen this in some of the research we've done around drug possession rates and others, is that because some of these differences are small, I do believe that they are solvable. It's not like some of the other disparities that we have in the state. The racial disparity for Black men in prison is 1,000 individuals, and there's only 1,300 in total in the institution. At times, for someone in my seat, solving that problem seems insurmountable. However, in this case, the difference that we see and the work that we've done with Chief Strait, I believe this is something that the city and the city police department can address, and I think can be addressed relatively quickly. And so I would offer that as the one positive. Maybe I'm an optimist in that sense, but I do want to emphasize that we don't want to worry too much about the fact that the numbers seem small, because they are still very meaningful.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I totally. It is still, Chief Luke is doing a great job. However, there's still this implicit bias, and when there are so few Black people in Oregon, and then you break it down to Milwaukie, and you're still 3 times more likely to get pulled over in this veil of darkness time. I mean, thank God, most all the times that I've been pulled over for driving while Black have not been in Oregon. So, you know, that's something to be said there. But, you know, I can't imagine what it's like for somebody who was born and raised here in Oregon. And like, you know, my family worries every time I go out by myself. And so it's just not surprising. And you're right. It totally is something that we can work on and fix. It's not insurmountable, but it still needs to be looked at like, there's so few Black people, but we're still getting pulled over at a larger rate, which is crazy to me.
Mayor, I'd actually like to give Luke just a chance, if it's okay, to say a couple of things before we keep going. Is that okay?
Sure. I didn't know if they were kind of done with the presentation, but yeah, Chief.
Thank you, Ann. And I'd like to, first of all, thank the Criminal Justice Commission again for making the time to be here. December is a busy time for us all. I know this is when their report is finalized, and I'm sure there's a lot of demand for their expertise. Obviously, this type of data and analysis was new to us a couple years ago, as Ken explained. And obviously, it's nothing we've previously had the expertise or bandwidth to do any of this kind of data collection or analysis. So we're very appreciative for the work that they and we've worked a lot over the last couple of years to integrate this type of data and information and kind of inform how we manage the police department. And that is ongoing work. Obviously, folks, these are challenging topics. I want to thank Councilor Nicodemus for his comments. And anytime that someone talks to us about their actual, lived experience, there's some vulnerability there. And I realize that isn't probably generally very much fun. And I appreciate it when people do that, because that does help us kind of have a shared understanding of this. And it also helps guide our path forward. And it reinforces the idea that wherever we're sitting right now, we are working through this together one way or another. And the more we actively do that together, the better the results that we'll get. I have to say, I'm humbled to be in this position. These are challenging issues. You often might hear us say that we try to lean into these. That's partially because that's what we want to do. When it's hard, it gets a little bit easier if you embrace the challenge and lean into it. So that's not to say that it's easy, simple, or fun. It's challenging, and I'm humbled to be in this position. I do get regular reminders that I am a part of a great police department, and the department continues to engage on this topic very thoughtfully. And we will continue to work through this together in much the same way that we are tonight. I am proud of the department and specifically how they've worked on this particular issue of equity in policing over the last few years. It has been and will be ongoing work. I absolutely recognize, as Councilor Nicodemus said, there is more work to be done. And I know full well we'll do another briefing next year at this time, and there will be a ton of work done in the meantime, as there has been the last year or two. I recognize and we acknowledge as humans, we all have implicit bias, and that starts with me. We acknowledge how important it is to constantly work to provide fair and impartial police services. We realize and we can imagine the impact the services that we provide have on real people like each one of you here today and the community members tuning in for this conversation. We also know how important transparency is and that it's a critical part of building trust and legitimacy for our department and any department in our position. That's why we scheduled this briefing this evening, and that's why we invited the Criminal Justice Commission here to share. Obviously, I couldn't begin to cover their processes and their data and their analysis in anywhere near the same way that they can. So thank you again for joining us. We will continue to share data. One of the ways that we share data and information is on our equity and policing page. And that's an avenue that we will continue to use. Some of the things that we've talked about going forward, we will continue to emphasize training and education. That goes without saying, but it is important. That has had a lot more emphasis the last couple of years. And we realize, again, that work isn't finished. There's more work to be done there. We will continue to use resources like the Criminal Justice Commission, the data that they have and the expertise within their office. We'll continue to use and also rely on our own equity manager, John Hennington, who has partnered with us full-time over this last year, at least within the sort of the supply and demand of his time and the scope of his job. We'll also work with staff from the State Center for Policing Excellence. They have resources there that can provide some technical assistance to us. And we have reached out to them and set up meetings. Again, I absolutely understand this is ongoing work and that it's incredibly important to members of our community, and how we work through this together will dictate our success. So I want to thank everyone here and our community members for the ongoing support that we receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And I agree, you know, we all definitely have implicit bias. We all came up with that. That's the way we were all raised. And it's purely conscious work to begin to reverse that. And I appreciate the work that your department has been doing for the last couple of years, and I appreciate the work that was presented tonight. I think it's clearly useful to have that data, because we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know where we need more work without some kind of benchmarks. So it's really helpful, and we appreciate it. We're glad the state is doing this.
Can I just add a couple of things that are coming, just so that council knows sort of some next steps of what you'll see. So John and I will be at our first equity steering committee meeting, I believe in January. I think they're the fourth Thursdays. Is that correct? Is that the date that seems to be getting selected, John?
That looks like the date where we'll end, yes.
So John and I will be working with that team for the first couple months just to help them get to know each other, figure out their path, create some spaces where the board itself can direct where they want to go. But we are also planning to bring this data before them, I believe in March or April. So we'll be having an explicit conversation about this at the time. One of the things that I deeply appreciate about the chief, and honestly, many, if not all of our officers, is the interest in getting to know our community. So I am looking forward to the relationship building that's going to happen in that space, and also the transparent conversations that'll happen in that space. I also appreciate that Chief Strait reached out to the national organization we work with for our implicit bias training and talked about these numbers in particular and about what we're looking at moving forward and how we support our team. And she was wonderful. Her focus really was on, hey, you all have a game plan. Start working on the game plan. So the relationship building really is a big part of it. The continued training is a part of it. The hiring practices are a part of it. The policy work we did last year is a part of it. All these things work together in order to continue to work forward. So I would also just reiterate what the chief said, that we are we're lucky to have the officers that we do who are leaning into this work with us. So I just wanted to thank them. And I also wanted to call out that I have bias in me about my own whole world of it. And I am grappling with that, as we all do. So this is not a statement against an individual. This is a statement about all of us together moving into our future together. And I really appreciate them leaning into that work with me and with the chief and with all of you.
Can I say one more thing?
Please.
And in no way am I saying that folks are racist, because sometimes that is where people jump to. And that's not what I'm saying. It's people have soft spots and they just need to see where those soft spots are. And our police department's doing a great job. We are a small city, so I'm glad that we're small, because I would hate to see what it looks like on a larger scale. But Chief Luke and Milwaukie PD, they're doing their best, and we're going to keep moving forward. And it's hard work. It's not easy. And it's going to continue to be hard, but in no way, shape, or form am I calling anyone a racist. I'm just saying there are soft spots, and we just need to tighten up a little bit.
And I can't thank you all enough for that partnership, for all of us working forward in that.
I want to say thank you, Councilor Nicodemus, for making your comments today and sharing with us and being vulnerable. I think that is, thank you. I want to say thanks to Chief Straight, because I think, one of the, when I first received this data, I think I knew that I could trust that he wasn't going to minimize these numbers. I knew that he and his force would embrace it. And as he mentioned, lean into it. And that's not easy. None of us, it's not about individual actions. It's not about individual racism. It's about the impact of the racist society that we all grew up in. And we can't minimize that. And just because it's 110 stops, those are 110 people who were 2.5 times more likely to be pulled over. And that's significant for those individuals who experienced that disparity. So I'm really grateful for this team and all of you, everyone on this screen, everybody who's behind this screen, for not shying away from this work, for not minimizing this data, and just receiving it with an open heart and a plan to move forward.
Just because I think we might be nearing the end of this, I haven't had a chance to thank them online, but thank you to Ken and to Kelly. The fact that they keep coming back and they keep helping us figure this out and they keep talking to us every year. It is a partnership to figure out how we do this work. So thank you to them for their partnership on this.
Thank you all for having us. The partnership we've worked on over the past year or two with the city and with the Milwaukie Police Department has been very fruitful. And I'll say this is one of the most engaged departments and cities we've had, even before we had any of these results that we needed to talk a little more deeply about. So thank you, Chief Straight. Thank you, Ann. And thank you, John. I know we haven't worked too much together yet, but looking forward to it in the months.
Thank you, Ken.
So again, we are going to clip this video so that it's going to be going up on our website, so that if people missed it tonight, or if you'd like to send it along to individuals to learn more about what's going on, feel free to send them the link. And then we will be working with our equity committee here in March, April timeframe. So we'll keep council posted and we'll do an update in the coming months. You're on mute, Mayor.
Thank you all.
Sure.
All right. Our next item is an update on our equity, justice, and inclusion goal, which will be presented by our equity program manager, John Hennington.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to thank you all for that thoughtful conversation about our stop data. We will be having more conversations about that with our Equity Steering Committee in the coming months, as Ann mentioned, and looking forward to continuing the work that we've been doing together with our department around this issue and across the city as we talk about equity in our city. So thank you for that. I'm going to make an attempt with my limited technical abilities to try to share my screen and show you our update. Just a moment here. You'd think I would be good at this by now too, but I am not. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Okay, so the last time I came before you to talk about our equity plan, I believe it was back in June or July. So it's been a little bit since we've talked about this. We've had a couple of visits since then to talk about particular things, but this is the first time we've talked about where we are as a whole across the city. So just wanted to give you an update on what we've been doing this past year and where we will be heading into 2022. So let's see. Here we go. So first I wanted to just share this. I shared this with our Milwaukie Leadership Academy a couple of days ago. Many of you have probably seen this illustration. It's by Tony Ruth, based on The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. And it talks about, or shows really just graphically, the difference between inequality, equality, equity, and justice. There are many versions of this around the internet, but it helps, I think, frame what we're talking about when we discuss these issues. Inequality is when we have an unequal access to opportunities. In this case, the tree that's loaded to one side because the tree is tipped. The tree is leaning. Equality, maybe, is when we evenly distribute tools and assistance to try to reach the tree. The problem is that the tree is still tipped, then the resources aren't available to everyone equally. Equity is when we provide custom tools that identify and address inequity. Justice is when we fix the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. We straighten the tree. So a lot of the work we talk about is around equity, but ultimately a lot of our goals are related to justice, about fixing inequalities in the system so that we have equal access to those tools and the opportunities across all individuals, basically so that someone's race or their gender or their sexual orientation doesn't have a predictable outcome on the results. Just as we saw with the stop data, ideally we would like to see the same outcomes for individuals regardless of who they are. When we get to that point consistently, then we know that we are moving towards justice. So that's a lot of the work we're doing, and I just wanted to share this as a reminder of where we are and why we're doing the work that we're doing here in the city. We talked about implicit bias and the training around that. And so I wanted to start with that. We've had a couple of staff trainings this year. Milwaukie Police Department had implicit bias training that was led by Lieutenant Carter Lieutenant Carter Larry is a Director of Safety and Security with the Valley View School District in Illinois. He's a 20-year veteran of the Bolingbrook, Illinois Police Department. And his training was designed by and for law enforcement officers with a focus on providing simple and realistic and effective techniques to assist in overcoming bias. This kind of training is what shows up when, as we looked at the data before, we have a statistically significant difference in the number of stops for Black drivers versus a white driver during the same time period, right, during morning to evening. What we did see, though, is once those stops occurred, those drivers were treated the same. We have no statistically significant differences between those stops. That's an encouraging sign. That means that what we're seeing is that once our officers are making a stop, they're treating all of our drivers the same. That's important to us, and that's something that I certainly hope we will see going forward into the future. And the way we get there is with continuing trainings like this. So I really appreciate Chief Strait for bringing in Lieutenant Larry to talk about this. It was a remote training, I think it was a really important way to continue reinforcing that bias is something that we all have. It is something that there is no human, I think, who can claim that they have no biases, right? Because that is part of being a human being. It's recognizing those biases and then addressing them, understanding in the moment, am I being impacted by bias? Is my decision making right now being impacted by bias? And making a conscious decision to move through that, right? Understand that this is bias and how to deal with that in that moment. So I really appreciate Chief Strait bringing in Lieutenant Larry for this. I hope we'll continue these trainings into 2022. And I really want to just give my thanks to Chief Strait for that. Across the city, for our non-police department staff, we also had unconscious bias training that was led by Michaela Gaston, who I will say it was just an absolute joy to work with for us on for the non-PD staff. We had her just a couple of weeks ago. She is a State Department Cultural Ambassador, the founder and executive director for the International Cultural Arts and Healing Sciences Institute. And her training for our staff was focused on how biases form and how to recognize and address them, as well as raising the awareness of sources that reinforce bias, so whether that's media, whether that's in comments that are left unchallenged, the microaggressions that exist. When we don't address them and deal with them and stop them, then we continue to reinforce bias. We continue to propagate this pattern forward. So a really important training. We hope to have at least 2 trainings a year for our non-PD staff, so that it's not quite going so long between trainings to continue these discussions. So just to really appreciate Michaela for joining us. Her was also a remote training, but I really enjoyed having her visit us, and we expect we'll have her back in the spring. Any questions?
I just wanted to add, John did an excellent job of finding her. She really was an incredible fit with the team, and she's just a delightful, wonderful human. The responses I got back from staff were just, they loved working with her. So I'm excited about what our next steps look like with this organization, with her in particular.
Likewise, we're working with World Trust Educational Services and really appreciate their work. They've done a lot of work in our community. They're based in Oakland, but they've done a lot of work in Portland and in Clackamas County. And we really appreciate their assistance. We'll be providing resources by them to our staff. So as new staff are hired, we'll be sharing films made by them, and I'll be conducting some smaller workshops using those materials. I am certainly not as dynamic as Ami, but I'll do my best as we work on getting our newer staff members caught up and on board. So I really appreciate them and their materials. Any questions about our trainings? And I can't see everyone, so Council Faulkner.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Mayor, did you?
No, I say go ahead.
I was just curious, and maybe you have a slide. I was wondering if at any point we thought we might be extending, staff and council have received various trainings. I'm not sure whether we've had a conversation, or maybe this is a question for the Equity Steering Committee about whether or not to extend opportunities for training to boards and committees and potentially even beyond that in the community.
That's a great question. Actually, as of today, we've acquired the rights to both one of the workshops provided by World Trust and to one of their films for unlimited streaming rights. So we can actually share those with our boards and commissions and with the public if we choose to do so. So I would love to continue to have a conversation about where we go with that in 2022, but we now have the rights to do that. Again, I'm not the most dynamic facilitator, but we'll figure out who can take that on in our communities coming up next year. But looking forward to finding ways to share these trainings with our boards and with the public.
You are excellent. First. The second piece, though, I do just want to add, there was a discussion last year when we were doing the implicit bias training with our police department about having a conversation with the community as well, and leading training around implicit bias with both our department and community members in the same room. We've actually paid for that they want to do it in person. So that is something that's still outstanding. We looked at trying to do it this next month, actually. And unfortunately, it's the same day we're going to visit the tribes. So we couldn't do it this month or this training period, but we're still looking for opportunities for that as well, Counselor.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay. And thank you so much for that, Anne. As Anne also mentioned, we do have our equity steering committee that will assemble for the first time next month. It's a 9-member group of community members, as this council appointed them last month. They are empowered to advise council and staff on matters related to justice, equity, and inclusion. We expect their first meeting will be right at the end of January. I think fourth Thursdays will be their regular meeting date. We're still working to finalize that. It's hard to get the schedules for everyone any time of year, and certainly during this busy time of year. But it's a really dynamic group of individuals. I'm looking forward to working with them, getting to know them as they get to know each other, and as they get to know the city and how we work, and hopefully help give us some insights from their lived experiences as to how we can be our best selves as we move forward on issues related to equity. The initial meetings will be, in addition to getting to know each other, we'll be developing a mission, vision, and goals, and then adopting bylaws. I expect that they'll do that around their third meeting, so probably around March they'll have bylaws, which then I will be bringing before the council. And then as we get into spring 2022, probably around April, we'll begin working on an equity lens for the city, and that'll be something. Obviously, this group would be overwhelmed if we put everything before them. We just simply couldn't do it, and so. By creating an equity lens that we can then provide to our staff, it allows us to consistently apply principles regarding equity to our work. Councillor Heisey.
So we just changed our system for doing interviews for boards and commissions, as you know, and I'm wondering if you might have any idea if we might have this equity lens or a draft available for when we do those interviews. It's a very tight timeline because I think those are happening in May, but just mostly wanted to express the interest and put the bug in your ear.
I appreciate that. I think that even though it may take us through May to complete that equity lens, I'm not sure how long that'll take. I believe that we can certainly have a conversation with the steering committee about that so that they can maybe give us some thoughts, some initial thoughts. It may not be the final version, but I think it's absolutely worth having the conversation as they have just been through an interview process for us, and they may have some thoughts about ways we can improve.
We would really, I would love that as someone who will be doing interviews. That would be great. So thank you, John.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? Okay, so policy reviews and development, and I'll try not to keep you all too long, but I also don't want to speed through this. So if there are questions, please feel free to jump in. Over the past year, I've been working with a number of our departments discussing policies and doing reviews as we start to dig into this work. There are a lot of policies that govern what we do as a city, as you all know, policies that are citywide, policies that are specific to certain processes or departments. Overall, I think our policies are in a really good place. I have seen a lot of really good work that's been done in our departments, a lot of thoughtful work long before this equity, inclusion, and justice goal became a reality. But that doesn't mean that we can't still improve, that we can't continue to look at our work. A lot of these policies, I think, will end up coming before the Equity Steering Committee in the future. But I've been doing some initial reviews and making recommendations. Most of my current work has been with the police department, along with Anne and Chief Strait and members of our community, as well as working currently with finance on procurement rules. We'll be bringing procurement rules before the council sometime in probably very early spring 2022. as we're working to get those revised, working closely with Kelly Tucker on that, and really appreciate her partnership on digging into some really complicated policies. So I won't say it's fun because I am so not a procurement nerd, but I really appreciate digging through this and the conversations we've been having about how we can best make our procurement more equitable. It's an area that local governments have a lot of work to do. And so I really appreciate that work and continuing that going into next year. So those policies will be coming before the council, probably before the Equity Steering Committee has a chance to look at them. Just the timing doesn't work out. But hopefully when we're looking at larger citywide policies, that will be something that they will be looking at going into the future. Ms. Councilor Beatty.
I wanted to ask about HR and
yes,
sort of the role in what your thinking is about HR and hiring procedures.
Happy to talk about HR, and I see Anne may have some thoughts on this as well. I've worked quite a lot with our HR director, Gary Rubella, over the last year, and I believe it is. I'm not going to surprise anyone by saying that Gary is.
I don't think you're surprising anyone. You're
okay. I was pretty sure that it's known that Gary is retiring at the beginning of next month. We have done a lot of work together, looking at policies, making changes, most of those minor so far, partially because this is a heavy lift. HR policies, there's a lot to them, and we want to make sure we give them a thoughtful look. So 2 reasons. 1, the Equity Steering Committee really should be a part of that process. Also, as we'll be bringing on board another HR director, it's only fair that the HR director have some part to play in shaping those policies going forward. So I expect that we will be talking a lot about HR policies next year, and there are a lot of decisions to be made about where we go with those. So I think we'll have some in-depth conversations both with the Equity Steering Committee and probably here in Council next year as we look at HR. And did I miss anything there?
I think the only thing I would add is, Councilor Beatty, you asked a little bit about hiring. So we did, I think we mentioned at a previous discussion with you all that we introduced a program called Spark Hire. And that was with the recommendation of Gary Rubella. I really appreciate him bringing it forward. It's allowed us to look at a lot more people who are interesting than we maybe would have in the past. And what we're finding is it's been a really helpful tool to see more than just someone's written resume and to get a real sense for them as an individual. And so we're finding we've found a lot of success with it in our police department. And we've had some success. I believe Scott Staffer's actually using it next week. So it's helping us get a more rounded experience with the individuals who are applying than maybe we've had in the past. So that's been really helpful.
And aren't we also considering using that for our boards and commissions interviews as well?
I think it's worth it. I think it's something council may want to consider. And we can talk about that in the new year, but it would allow you all basically to, instead of having a written application, you could do a verbal application. You could ask the same questions through the Spark Hire process. It would give you you'd actually see them present what their connections are. So for us, we've been asking equity questions within that presentation. It allows us to see how people actually engage with that topic. It's incredibly helpful. So some people just are more verbal in the way that they communicate, and it gives you a better, more well-rounded opportunity than if you do it in writing. So absolutely, Council President Heisey, I think it's definitely something that we should talk about in the new year, going into the June interviews in particular, especially with the sheer volume you may end up needing to listen to in order to get appointments onto your boards. So absolutely, it's been a really great tool.
And thank you, Anne. And also add to that, if I may, we've in this past year, and actually just last several months, have added a I'm not sure really what the word would be. Disclaimer is not the right word for it, but language to all of our job postings that encourage applicants to consider their experience broadly. That we encourage non-traditional experience, and so people should really bring their full selves to the table. Just because you don't have the specific degree that you think traditionally says I'm a fit for this role, but you've been doing very similar or even the same work practically, bring that to the table, show us who you are as an individual, and then let us find the fit. So we're really encouraging that, and want to continue to encourage people to really think about what they can bring to us as individuals, not just what their resume says about them or their degree says about them. We certainly want experienced individuals, but experience comes in a lot of different forms. And so I really want to give my thanks to Gary for really leaning into that and being a leader on making sure that we are encouraging a really broad pool of applicants to the city. I think it is bearing fruit, and I really appreciate that and look forward to continuing to see who we bring on board as we go into 2022. Any other questions? Okay, so one policy that we have been working on as a team, this has been a collaboration between the city manager's office, the office of the city recorder, and the municipal court, is a language access policy. It covers translation and interpretation services. And so this policy provides guidance for those services citywide. There are a couple of definitions that I think we need to get out of the way before we dive into this too much. So just interpretation, the oral rendition of spoken message from one language to another, and translation, the process of translating works or text from one language to another. We often use those interchangeably, but for this policy, it's important that we define which is which. We also, for this policy, needed to define what is a major language spoken in Milwaukie. And for that, we set the number at least 4% of the city population belonging to a specific language group spoken at home. That's when we round up to the nearest whole percentage point. Currently, there is only one language other than English that would meet that criterion, and that is Spanish. It's about 3.6% of our population. And so when we round up, we get to 4. Right now, that's the only one that's there, but this will allow us, as our population grows and changes, certainly another language could hit that mark. And the moment that something passes 3.5%, we would then include that as a major language for the purposes of this policy. So first, interpretation. Just broadly, this policy says that, oops, pardon me, let me go. Well, we've gone, there's my surprise. Pardon me here. Options for interpretation should be made available to community members in their preferred languages, including direct interpretation via bilingual staff members or the use of an interpretation service. So this is citywide. Information regarding interpretation services must be readily available at all city offices so that both staff and members of the public know how to access these services. We'll also be making sure that this is posted online. This policy also prohibits the use of minors to interpret sensitive information for an adult unless there are no other viable options. And so that's having a minor who is trying to translate or should say interpret something that may affect someone's finances, their legal status, any sort of have legal impacts, financial impacts, other sensitive communications. Having a minor do that really is a disservice both to the minor and to the adult. And so we should be paying for that interpretive service, and we have resources to do so. So this just makes it very clear that rather than relying on a minor, we should be using one of those services to have professional interpretation done when it's a matter of something sensitive. So that is a very simplified version of the interpretation policy. Basically, we have access to interpretive language services. We should be using them, and we will be making sure that that information is readily available both to our public and the staff in the coming months under this policy. Translation services, online communication, and other key project materials that relate to a critical topic or program area should be translated into those major languages in our community. Again, right now that would be Spanish. Critical topics in this policy are defined as city-provided utility services, public safety, city finances, taxes and fees, construction projects and related impacts, and community engagement. So those are, which is quite a lot of what we do as a city. So that'll be a good amount of material that will need to be translated. But it's something that after a lot of discussions and consideration of what the key things that we needed to make sure were available in those major languages, those were the areas that we landed on this policy. The policy was approved by our city manager, and so as part of that, that means the pilot will be translated into Spanish beginning with the February issue. We'll start working on exactly how we'll be making that available and the distribution methods for that. But the pilot will be our first big undertaking for translation, and then we'll be working going forward on translating new materials, as well as going back and translating materials that are of vital importance that may be a bit older, but that we won't be updating anytime soon. So there'll be a process there across the city to do this. We'll be working with selecting a vendor in the next month or so, and beginning to get to work on that translation.
Are there questions from all of you? I know this is something we've talked about over the last couple of years. So are there pieces that you want to say, or things that that you think we're missing, or questions or concerns?
Councilor Beatty?
No real questions. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me to start with Spanish as that language to translate into. I don't, I mean, at a future time, it may be relevant to revisit the major language definition, but I mean, it makes sense to start with Spanish. And I just want to make sure, I'm pretty sure it's what you were saying, but I just want for people out there to hear, when we talk about the Spanish and the translation, we're talking about written materials. When we're talking about interpreting for court, for public meetings, et cetera, we're talking about any language.
That is correct. That is correct. And that doesn't mean that we won't be able to provide translation in another language on a limited basis if there's a specific need in the community. So, for example, if we were, working on a project in the community where we know that there is a much higher concentration of people who speak a language that isn't English or Spanish, we might on that basis and translate written documents in that area. So if there's a particular construction project or something like that, or utility project, but citywide, this translation policy would be for written into Spanish, interpreting any language. We have access to dozens upon dozens, well over 100 languages through our language access services. So it's just finding that interpreter. It could take a little extra time in some cases. For the courts, they will be certainly following the rules that are established by the statewide courts. I believe they have some specific rules on the qualifications for those interpreters. But otherwise, citywide, we can pretty quickly find an interpreter for almost any language you can imagine. I should also say this policy does not apply to American Sign Language, because that is covered under the Americans with Disability Act. So there's a completely separate set of laws around sign language and also Title VI. So we're looking here specifically at spoken interpretation and written translation. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Next up, the Latinos in Local Government Network. I just want to just say how proud I am to work for a city manager who has taken such a lead on equity work. Our city manager, Ann Ober, in the summer of 2021, joined with leaders from 5 other cities here in Oregon to create a new nonprofit in the state, the Oregon Latinos in Local Government Network. This organization supports the professional development of Latinos in leadership in local government, and inspires other local government professionals in Oregon to improve the delivery of culturally responsive services to Latino communities. The city has joined the network as of December of this year, so as of this month, and the city manager will be relinquishing her board seat in July 2022 to provide more leaders with a chance to make a change in Oregon. So I just really want to say thank you to Ann. I'm really excited about this network and what it can mean for local government across our state, both in who we see working in local government and taking up leadership roles in local government, as well as how government provides services to our communities. So I think this is a really amazing project, and I hope to see it flourish and to see others like it here in our state. So just thank you, Ann, for your work on that. Do you want to add any insights on this?
I'm adding 2 things. One is just I'm doing this in part to tell my managers, my bosses, that I've been spending time on a board helping create this for our staff. So this is partially just me admitting we've been working on this for the last year. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited it's granting us the space to do affinity groups actually for smaller cities like ours, where it's really hard to have a safe space for Latinos to be able to talk in an organization when they're just such a small percentage of a workforce. So that's one of the pieces I'm really excited about. The second piece is just how we communicate out with, we're all learning, our communities are diversifying. It's really exciting time, and it's a chance for us to learn how to be the best stewards of our public resources with our Latino community. So I'm super excited about the work they're doing and that we're doing with them. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say.
Any questions or comments on that? Okay. And last thing for us is the Clackamas County Racial Justice Research Project. This is a project that I am really thrilled that we're getting to work on as a city in partnership with Clackamas County and other cities across our county. The question that I've been asked when it comes to this is what does research justice mean? What is research justice? Research justice goes beyond just extracting information and collecting a needs assessment of groups. It recognizes that those who are part of these underrepresented groups and marginalized communities are experts in their lived experiences and have strategies and solutions to ensure the well-being of their communities and environments. So it's letting the communities lead the research rather than researchers lead the research. That approach is particularly helpful in areas where we see that we have communities that make up very small portions of the population. Traditionally in government, we look for, a statistically significant sample size, right? To be able to say, okay, well, if we have enough people from this group to who can respond, then we can actually talk about their situation. The problem with that is that when you have very small groups, it is very hard to reach that threshold. And so rather than, saying, okay, well, we've got to get to this number, it's looking at individuals and saying these individuals have expertise. They understand their lived experiences. And if they're able to collect information from their fellow community members in their communities, we should listen and lean into that data. And so it is a different approach, and one that I really appreciate. Clackamas County has partnered with the Coalition of Communities of Color to lead this research. And they are assembling a steering committee of community members from across Clackamas County So, and I'll talk a bit about that steering committee in just a moment, but I think that's a really important process, in that they're finding key stakeholders who can then help shape the research, help shape the collection of that data. This is a 2-year process, so it's a very in-depth study, and I think it will give us the most clear image of what it is like for individuals from communities of color across our county, both in our urban areas as well as our rural communities, and the differences between those two places. So I'm really happy that we're able to work with Clackamas County and the Coalition of Communities of Color on this project. Hopefully we can have the coalition come and talk a bit more about this in detail in the coming months. Pardon me, one more. So this project is focused on members and citizens of tribal nations, not just the 9 federally recognized tribes. So we're talking about all of our tribal nations, including some community members who are members of tribal nations who have very specific historical connections to parts of our region. So looking more broadly at tribal members, as well as the Asian, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, Middle Eastern, Latinx, Latino communities, Slavic, Black, African American, African immigrant, and refugee communities. That is the focus of this research. And as such, the researchers will be looking for stakeholders and steering committee members from those communities. So individuals who may be listening, or if you're aware of individuals who might represent those communities who might be interested in this project, it is a compensated steering committee. And so I'm happy to talk with anyone about that, or we can, I'll provide contact information for Clackamas County on this. But it's a really vital project for our community, and I think it will give us a real sense of where we need to do work and what type of work we need to do in the months and years to come.
John, I would love to have that, like a link to a website or a specific person to reach out to, so that I could help spread the word about that. Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely, Council President Heisey. I will make sure to share that. I do have a link here. And so right now, the easiest point of contact is clackamas.us/diversity. This project is just getting off the ground, so there'll be more links and probably a formal website for this forthcoming, but that is the best contact right now, is the Office of Equity and Inclusion at Clackamas County. Really want to express my appreciation to Martine Koblenz for her partnership on this. She is just amazing, doing incredible work at Clackamas County, and this is a project that I think will be transformational in the next decade in how we provide services to these communities. So again, this is this slide talks a little bit about research justice, but the idea here is to engage to better these experiences through participation in community engagement meetings, disseminating information, surveys, and other data, and then supporting the effort with community members, stakeholders, and other leaders. So we're hoping, that should say in Clackamas County. So we're hoping that community members will get engaged in this process, remain engaged in this process. It will be going through, I believe, about March 2024. So we're looking at about a 2-year window before we get the final report sometime later in 2024. That's a lot of time to collect the data, but that's needed because this is not just sending out a blanket email across the county. We don't reach the people that we need to reach in that way. So this is a really in-depth way of gathering information and having thoughtful conversations about the lived experiences of people across our county. And that's all I have. Any questions on this project or anything else I've talked about today?
John, do you mind closing out of the presentation?
Sure.
Chat. Thanks.
Thank you for all this work, John. It's not easy taking all this on in Oregon, in Milwaukie, right? So I know the emotional toll that some of this can take on a person. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Counselor. I will say that it can be challenging at times. However, I couldn't think of a better place in Oregon to do it. The support of this council, of our staff, of our city, have made this work much easier. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge how amazing our city staff has been and partners on this work around the city. I've had people coming to me. They don't run away from me when they see me coming. They actually reach out to me and say, hey, I have something I'd like to work on. Do you have time? And I really appreciate that. So I just want to thank our amazing city staff for really taking ownership in this work and leadership in this work and often leading me. I really appreciate that.
True story. True story.
Well, and you are just a little past your 1-year anniversary, so you dived into a lot in a year. So good job.
Thanks so much, Councilor Beatty. Yes, just over a year. I think I first spoke to you all about a year and maybe 2 weeks ago. So happy to be back here 54 weeks later, and a lot more to do in the next 52 weeks. And beyond.
Yeah. That was a lot. That's great work. Thank you so much. It was like drinking from a fire hose a little bit.
We will also share the slide deck. So we do have an equity page. So this information will be provided there. I haven't gotten my email out to staff yet, John. So we'll be using this also as content just to talk to our staff too about where we're at. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And we've got some big work in the next 3 months. So I couldn't imagine a better partner. So thank you, John, for everything. It's been a really wonderful experience.
Thanks so much, Ann.
Okay, Mayor, can I make a recommendation that we take 5 minutes before Natalie comes back on board? 10 minutes, according to Councilor Beatty. Okay.
And it is. See you all at 8:43.
We're back on air.
Awesome. All right, so we are back in the regular session, but we are going to go into what was supposed to be the second half of our work session to discuss the tree portion of the code package that we will be having hearings on in January and February. So I think Natalie, is that right? You presenting?
Yeah. Good evening, Mayor, Council President Heisey, and Council. Peter Passarelli, our Public Works Director, and myself, Natalie Rogers, Climate and Natural Resources Manager. We're here tonight to talk about the tree code. We came to you a few months ago, I believe now, to kind of go over the conceptual overviews of what the tree code consists of. And so we're going to kind of give a quick refresher of those concepts. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've made since last time we came to you with the tree code concepts, and particularly a few of the changes from Planning Commission that was recommended. And then I will have a question for you at the very end, but feel free to pause in between, and I'll try not to talk so fast, but I will try to watch for hands. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that just yet? There we go. Perfect. Okay, so just as a little outline today, first I'm going to be talking about the residential non-development tree code. So that is the tree code portion that would be the most common, I would say, that we'll be seeing, the regular kind of landscaping type tree code of folks wanting to remove a tree. Then I'm going to be going into the residential development. And so I'm going to be talking about the different standards around the development tree code. The residential development tree code only kicks in when there's an additional housing unit or a land subdivision. So that's key, because if somebody's building a swimming pool, for example, and they're wanting to remove trees, that is the typical residential non-development. That's the simplified, we'll call it, tree code. I am going to touch on some of the low income assistance work, which I think we've already brought to you. And then overall, this draft tree code only affects residential zones, and it's a supplement to our public tree code, which we modified and adopted last year. So we already have a public tree code. Our team is already working through tree permits. This is just the residential component. This was called for in the comp plan, as well as the climate action plan, our urban forest management plan, and a few other city policies. So the residential non-development code. So this is tree removals not relating to development. So this is going to be landscaping. This is going to be hazard trees, dead, dying trees. Say there's a tree causing significant, unmitigatable infrastructure impacts. That would be where this tree code really kicks in. So the limit, so essentially a tree permit for removal would be required if the tree is greater than 6 inches in diameter at breast height. That's 4.5 feet from the ground. There's 2 different permits essentially for removing a tree. You have your type 1 permit, which is, I call it the streamlined approval standards. So these are the ones that are spelled out in the code. It's things like dead, dying hazard trees, fire hazards, infrastructure damage, invasive trees, et cetera. Your type 2 permits are if you're removing multiple trees or you're removing trees that are not meeting the type 1 standards. And I'm going to go over those type 1 standards in just a little bit. So we'll dive into that. But overall, there is a city manager appeal process. So appeals will go to Ann. And we're hoping that these type 1 and type 2 permits, we do have our urban forester, Courtney Wilson, on staff. This should be very streamlined, and we're working right now to come up with an online process for it. So this should not be a burdensome process. So I've split out the different type of the type 1 tree permit and the type 2 tree permit here, and then the replanting requirements. So a permit is only required for trees greater than 6 inches in diameter, unless it's an agricultural tree. So say you have a fruit orchard or a Christmas tree farm, those are exempted from our tree code. The type 1 tree permit, these are our streamlined permits for removal. So things like dead, dying, diseased, fire hazard, public transportation right-of-way projects, which we already have a process working on public trees for the at least public, like for safe projects, for example. In addition, you can remove 1 healthy tree per year, less than 12 inches in diameter at breast height. So that's kind of a single tree that's healthy, maybe for landscaping purposes. And that is a healthy tree. So say you have 1 dead tree and 1 healthy tree that's less than 12 inches in diameter. Both of those would fall under this type 1 tree permit. The type 2 tree permit kicks in when you're looking at removing a healthy tree greater than 12 inches in diameter at breast height. Or if you're looking at removing more than 1 healthy tree greater than 6 inches in diameter at breast height, which you would be able to get through a type 1 removal permit. If you're removing 2 of them, then you would need to go through the type 2 permit. For both type 1 tree removals and type 2 tree removals, replanting may be required. There are certain situations, for example, if there's a fire, for example, you're doing a thinning based on the guidance of an ISA certified arborist, you won't have to replant if your intention is to thin based for the health of the trees. And then additional replanting inches may be required for type 2 permits greater than 18 inches in diameter. What that means is that if you have a tree that you're moving that's 20 inches in diameter, replanting with a 2-inch caliper tree is not equivalent. So it gives discretion to the urban forester to essentially assign additional inches for replanting requirements. City of Portland also has this standard. And then there are exemptions, as I mentioned, for certain tree removals. And then you can also do a fee in lieu of replanting. So if you don't want to replant a tree, there's a fee alternative in which the city will essentially use those monies in our tree fund to go further urban forest efforts, including replanting a tree elsewhere in the city. So that's the residential non-development code. I know it's at the conceptual level, but our goal is for this to be pretty streamlined. So on the development, so residential development. So now we're into when you're doing a land subdivision, when you're constructing a new housing unit. That's when our development tree code kicks in. There's 4 main standards in our development tree code. Our preservation standards, which means that we're hoping to protect existing trees. Our canopy standards, which is the plant back, so making sure that we're trying to hit that 40% canopy goal. Protection standards, essentially ensuring that trees that are being preserved, as well as trees that are going to be planted in the future, are going to be essentially planted in conditions that ensure their success. And soil volume standards, which essentially means that there's enough soil to support a tree there. So preservation standards. So the preservation standards, like I mentioned, are to protect existing trees on site. So before, when we brought this to you, our concept was that we would have this list of essentially different trees of varying priorities. Well, after talking to tree board and talking internally with staff, we realized it was really difficult to start being discretionary on what's a priority tree. And really, we were considering all trees priority in the community. And so we got rid of that breakdown of species priority. And instead, we went to more of a canopy coverage type schematic, which matches better our canopy standard. And we think simplifies it a little bit. And I'll explain this examples in just a few minutes. So one key thing is in our preservation standards, invasive species are not included. That means that we're not requesting anyone preserve invasive species. In fact, we're trying to remove barriers to remove invasive species. And then overall, we have this 40% canopy goal for sites. We're saying, okay, we understand you're going to have to dip below that 40% likely in construction. So we set this cap at 30% on-site canopy or 20% for affordable housing. Or if you dip below that number, that's when you start paying mitigation fees. And I have here at the bottom a little table. And what this means is that we've created essentially 4 different tiers. And so wherever you are starting with, you essentially pay a mitigation fee for how many tiers you dip down into. So if we're looking on the right here, at the very top right, I have a site, and these sites actually exist within Milwaukie. I have a site where it has 30% existing tree canopy, and I circled the tree that potentially they might want to remove because they're going to build an addition onto their house to build an additional housing unit. They remove this tree, which is central inside the property. They dip down to 24% site coverage. And tree canopy is really easily calculated. You just grab the diameter of the tree from the trunk to the edge of the drip line, and then you use pi r squared. So then once they remove that tree, you're down to 24% site coverage. We go over to our table here and we see, okay, they went from 30% down to 24%. That's just the one tier. And so they're just going to be paying 1. So the 50% site canopy. So removal of the tree, they go from 50% site coverage down to 20% site coverage. They're going to be paying 2. Oh, and I see that there's actually a mistake. That should be the example is 1 mitigation fee on the first one. The second one, the 50% down to the 20%, that's going to be 2. And then the 90% canopy at the very bottom, they have a fully canopied out site. They want to remove 3 trees in order to maybe build a couple different housing units or a few different reasons. They go down to 70% site coverage. They don't have to pay any mitigation fees because they didn't dip under that 30%. Are there any questions on the preservation standards? If not, I'm going to dip onto the canopy standards. Okay. So, oh yeah.
Can you go back? I just want to make sure. So, if a person comes in, I'm just trying to play it out in my head. Sorry. I mean, I guess I like the percentages because it incentivizes them to think about which thing removes least coverage, I guess. I mean, we are treating all canopy the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And part of that is because coming up with priority tree lists for species, we'd have to invest a lot of staff time and resources on constantly updating those lists, because we know, especially with climate change, what's an existing priority species now might not be the same species even in 5 years. As we start to see species decline or thrive in the community, we always have, things written out in the code which says, trees listed on the Oregon noxious weed list or the Milwaukie invasive species list will be considered invasive. So it's almost like we're taking more of a redlining approach to it, saying, hey, these ones we know are invasive and we know they cause significant ecosystem damage. Other ones, say they are more ornamental. So even say like a dogwood variety, which might not provide the most habitat value. Who's to say that's going to be better or worse than a hemlock, which might not be doing well in the higher temperatures. So that's kind of why we started to really, when we had to come up with a species list for prioritizing, we were having a really hard time kind of trying to fit which bin each fell in. One thing is, the way we were defining some priority species was based on their location in natural areas and habitat protection zones. All of those land use requirements that fit with the additional protections of working within these habitat protection zones and natural areas, that still exists within planning. So there's still additional requirements for some of the work that they're doing. This is just simply on the removals, and then we're looking essentially at all trees equal within the lot.
So this may not be fair to ask you because it's, it gets into the part Vera presented, but just thinking about it, is there an option that says you can't reduce to 30 because you're already getting this incentive for, you're being allowed to build higher or you're being allowed to do X or Y in order to preserve the tree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as I know, there's no measure to prevent, I would say, double dipping is how I'm going to call it. As far as I know, there's nothing in there. We can definitely talk to planning to see what we can do about making sure that these incentives aren't stacking without proof of preservation of trees.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to write that down. Did I hear somebody else had another question? Okay, good. All right. So canopy standards. So this is we want to plant back to 40%. So we have these community goals of 40% canopy by 2040. And as Peter and I have shared before, about 80% of our canopy in Milwaukie falls on private property. And that's kind of why we think it's important to really create this canopy preservation, but then also encourage the planting of canopy on private property because, it's I think where most of our land mass is in the community. So essentially this canopy standards ensure intentional preservation as well as these replanting. So our canopy standards, when you're getting canopy credit, is how we're calling it. It includes both existing tree canopy as well as the future mature canopy of either those existing trees, whatever is less or greater, or new plantings. So what we mean by that is, say you plant an oak, right? A young oak that's a 2-inch DBH, you plant it there on the property. That oak might only have 10 square feet of a canopy existing, right? Because you just planted it, it's a baby. The mature canopy is essentially the maximum growth it could achieve. And so that way we're not, saying that we want you to plant these super big caliper trees right off the bat, because actually it shows that sometimes when you plant a larger caliper tree, it actually lowers its survival rate because it's already well established and sometimes it can be root bound. But we're essentially trying to consider what these trees will grow to be. So we have this table here, and you can see it at the very bottom, the tree location and the canopy credit. So what this means is that we realize, we're giving people credit for this future growth, but we want to take into account that a tree planted in a city, in a city facing climate change, in an urban city facing climate change, is not going to be matching up to the ideal tree planted in its native habitat, out in a forest somewhere. So we adjust these credits to essentially make sure that we're not being too optimistic and over assuming what that's going to grow to. So when we're giving people canopy credit, we give them 100% for the existing on-site trees, either what they exist as now or what they can grow to be, their future mature growth. And that's kind of a little perk for preserving existing trees, saying, hey, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and we're going to assume this tree is going to grow to its full potential. Planted on-site trees, so trees that are planted during development, we give them 75% canopy credit for their future mature growth. That's saying, hey, we probably realize this tree is not going to grow up to be the ideal tree, but it's going to get close. Existing right-of-way trees, so in the preservation standards, all the trees need to be on-site to receive credit. In this one, we acknowledge that canopy overhangs onto the private property from the adjacent right-of-way. So existing right-of-way trees get 50% canopy credit, and planted right-of-way trees get 50% canopy credit. So in this example, in the top, you see here that there's 2 trees that are planted. So we have the site that had 10% site canopy after they removed all of their trees. They built their additional housing unit. We have a 7,000 square foot lot, and they are left with 700 square foot existing canopy. So we need to reach up to 40% canopy cover. We did a little math. That means we need 2,800 square feet of canopy to meet our 40% canopy standard. So what we did, if I was the arborist, I would say, okay, well, we can plant these 2 white oaks. Maybe each of them are at 7 feet. Right now, they're about 2-inch caliber. We plant these 2 white oaks, and a white oak, based on this list that we're generating as a city that we will have ready for developers and arborists to look at, that says what the future mature canopy is. 2,000 square feet at maturity for an oak. And I will say that is a big canopy, right? So 2,000 square foot canopy at maturity, they get 75% canopy credit because they're newly planted trees. There's 2 of them, which means they get 3,000 square feet of canopy credit after planting those trees. So at the end, with the 700 existing square feet of canopy they have, plus the newly planted trees, they end up with 3,700 total site square footage of canopy, which means they have 52.8% canopy coverage. So great, they made it. They don't have to pay any mitigation fees. They overexceeded our 40%. Alternatively, maybe they didn't want to plant 2 trees. They only want to plant 1 tree. They can do 1 oak, and they can end up paying the difference through a mitigation. So yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
So I'm a little surprised that our tree board which has arborists and, on it. I'm a little surprised that this floated by them because not all trees grow as fast as other trees, right? Mm-hmm. And so an oak is a great example. An oak is a very slow grower. So yes, it will be enormous eventually, but the eventually won't be in probably the lifetime of the person who planted it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think the hard part is we really don't want to be incentivizing people planting fast growing trees, which reach maturity quicker, and that also could decline quicker. I mean, we don't want people to be tailoring, and it will happen that folks will tailor their tree selection for, achieving amount of credits that they can. But we don't want to discourage people from planting oaks in favor for maybe a fast growing, smoke tree or something. So it's hard to figure out. And that's something that we're going to have to really be conscious of when we're coming up with this list of canopy at maturity for each species. And maybe sometimes what we need to do is err more on the side of caution and give a lower number than what we think. But consistency is key. So once we create that list, we'll just have to make sure it's consistent. It's just hard not to incentivize those fast growing trees of a certain species without, penalizing, all these other slow growing white oaks, for example, which we want people to be planting because they provide so much habitat.
A couple quick things, if I can mention, just so on what we're just talking about there. So one, there are many lists out available that we can find that provide canopy growth.
I wouldn't think you have to reinvent that wheel.
So we won't be, we won't have to reinvent that wheel. The other thing I wanted to point out was, the tree board really, a lot of their focus has been on the preservation side. I mean, they've really wanted to try to, preserve as many existing trees. And then the planting piece is important, but it was sort of secondary to sort of trying to preserve existing canopy on sites.
Well, was there any discussion of instead of, maturity, whatever that may be, canopy at year 20 or something?
Yeah, and some folks, some communities do have lists of that age, but once again, that we are going to choosing the maximum canopy they can get within those 20 or 30 years. So the oaks and those slow growing trees will still lose out. Right. That is one approach we can look at though, and we can see which species truly get, maybe penalized for being slow growing, or what can we do essentially about equaling, leveling the playing field for them. But just, the data that I've seen is the most easiest is just at maturity. But once again, that's at maturity in an ideal situation. So we'll still need to do a little bit of tweaking and making sure that we're using those consistent values.
Well, and I don't feel strongly about this. I just wanted to know what the tree board had discussed and, sort of how they were looking at it. I mean, they have way more expertise in this than I have.
Mm-hmm. And it has been a discussion point. It has been a point of discussion. And, the credits that we were providing or the percent reduction for, 70, you only get 75% credit for on-site, that was sort of trying to get to that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Okay.
I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it. Peter and I have talked about this in the past, and it's thinking about that very issue of time, right? And trying to cool our city, have all the advantages, all the pluses that a tree gives you sooner and later, right? So not only building in the long time effects that like an Oregon white oak would have, but also shading the street or whatever sooner, because our timeline is actually pretty short.
Mm-hmm.
And something I had thrown out, and I don't know how we would incentivize this, but is the concept of alternating trees, particularly when we're talking about street trees, between a fast growing tree and then the next tree being a slow growing tree, like an oak, so that the one comes to maturity in 20 years. And then as that's dying off in 80 years or 100 years, that oak is now at maturity. And oaks are used to coming up, right? Mm-hmm. Shaded, because that is their natural sort of habitat. But it gets us both of the things that Lisa is talking about. It gets us the long-term effect and the short-term effect. And I don't know what the code would look like to incentivize that thought process.
Yeah, and that's a good question, particularly around kind of that successional growth that you want to have with urban forests. We're doing a few things to address that right now. For one thing, for street trees, they still need to get a permit. To even plant a street tree, you do need technically a permit. It doesn't cost anything, but we want to know, so that way we can guide what species that we're planting. In a development situation, our intention is to have our urban forester involved at the beginning of the conversation. Hopefully that means that she can work with the developer to choose the appropriate public trees to make sure we can have that variety and growth, because we don't want to promote a monoculture, particularly in urban environments. And just for those listening, when you have a monoculture, it increases, a monoculture meaning everything's the same species, it increases the risk of disease, pests, etc. Essentially, it looks like a good buffet for whatever wants to eat that one particular species. So having some variety increases the resilience. So we want to be a part of that conversation early, particularly for public trees, to ensure that they're planting appropriately. The other thing I was going to add is just as we want, Courtney to be involved with those public trees, we also, we're fortunate in that our community has an urban forester on staff, meaning that folks are welcome to utilize us, call us, send us an email, ask us questions about tree selection. We're going to be having a yard tree list, a recommended tree list. And I think this is part of that ongoing outreach and education that we're intending on doing, particularly after the code is adopted. We're working with a consultant right now to develop a bunch of outreach materials to provide that information, because, it's also, it's great for the property to have a variety of different trees. So that way you don't end up having to, having a windstorm that takes down one cottonwood. Instead you can have a variety of a Doug fir who's still providing you all that benefit if you're concerned about those issues. The last thing I'll say to that too is the Public Works Department right now is working on a tree inventory. And so we did a pilot inventory this last year, which we're just taking some samples throughout the community. Our intention is to continue that inventory. We're also kind of adding more data as we're going around doing some tree maintenance in the community. And part of that is to just get a good idea of what species exist in the community right now. Where do we have those long stretches of public trees that are all, reaching their maturity and they don't have those successional species underneath? And where can we have the opportunity to do some planting on public spaces? So we're aware of it. I think that this is a great point to make, especially when we're working with private property owners on encouraging variety in their tree planting, particularly when landscaping, sometimes monoculture is more prevalent because of maintenance. So that's a great point. And I think we're hoping to do some community outreach to really talk to folks about that. Okay. So the last two standards, I put them on the same slide here because we've mentioned them before. Nothing's really changed since we last talked to you, everyone. So the protection standards. So protection standards are essentially just ensuring that trees that are existing on site or trees that are going to be planted are protected from construction. Construction has inherently a lot of really heavy equipment rolling over roots. And so fencing around root zones, making sure we're not doing soil compaction where we're intending on planting a young tree in the future. These things essentially ensure the success, or at least help create a situation which can allow for young trees to thrive in the future. And we have a full kind of prescriptive path outlined for our protection standards in the code, which makes it very easy to follow and check off when you're developing your development permit to submit. There's also a performance path available under ISA guidance, essentially acknowledging that there's going to be some site constraints and maybe some, variances or variety of different protection is needed. The one caveat being, so root protection zones, that's essentially when you set up a fence like you see here around the drip line to make sure you're not compacting roots. We don't allow for a performance path, essentially any variance of root protection for off-site trees. So if your neighbor has a tree and the root zone goes onto your property, you still need to have a protection fence because essentially it's not your tree, right? So if your construction damages it and kills it, the city doesn't want to be essentially responsible saying, hey, we said it was okay for you to do that. So there's no variance for that, but then we'll work with the ISA arborist to essentially figure out the site details. And then the other thing I would say too is one thing that came from Planning Commission, and it's allowed for in the existing tree code that we brought you, is around performance bonding for trees. That's something that we haven't had a longer conversation about how we'd want to go about. We do, I believe, Peter, have bonding in our public trees for example, for like our safe projects and such. But planning commissioners were really kind of urging staff to take a longer look at that and really encouraging the performance bonding for development as well. And that's to ensure things like the protection standards were successful. And then, were you going to say something, Peter?
I was just going to add in those sort of bonding requirements, what I anticipate there those would be associated with the master fee schedule.
So could you explain a little more on the bonding requirements? Would that be enforced by, like, the developer would be responsible, or is the city responsible, or how do we do the enforcement? How do we know 5 years out?
The developer would post a bond for a certain period of time at a certain, maybe like 125%. I'm just using that as an example of the value of the tree. And they would have that bond in place for, up to 3 to 5 years, perhaps, saying that tree is going to make it through its establishment period. And then if it does, the bond, we would release that bond. That would be sort of a potential way to do it.
And that's done already in lots of other settings, right? Like I built a swale and I had to have it was only a year and a half. It wasn't as long, but I had to have an 18-month bond on the survival of 80% of the plants in the swale or whatever.
Right. Yeah. We have, infrastructure bonds, maintenance bonds to make sure that, something that was constructed lasts, at least a year.
So does that mean that the property, I want to spell this out because I think a lot of people are not familiar with bonds. And so I want to make sure we're being really explicit. So you're saying that the developer plants a tree, it's in somebody's yard in the development, the residential development. It is expected to survive for 3 years. If it doesn't, the bond means that there is money to replace the tree. And then is there any sort of responsibility on the part of the developer or the homeowner for tending to that tree and ensuring its success?
Well, that's really sort of the purpose of the bond. So the developer has that we're holding that financial instrument to make sure that the tree gets established. And if the tree doesn't and it dies during that period, the expectation would be that they replace it, right?
So the developer is going to pay more money if they plant a tree that doesn't survive. And I'm not saying 3 years will be the amount of time, but 3 years.
Yes. Or they would replace that tree. And if they don't, then the city could use that bond to pay for that replacement.
Okay. Because I don't think that the general public is very familiar with the concept of bonding as applied to something like a tree in particular. So that's why I'm trying to really get this in plain language as much as possible. So we're not asking the new homeowner to take on additional fiscal responsibility. We're not asking the city to take on additional financial commitments. We are asking for the developer to take on an additional financial commitment around ensuring the long-term health and safety of a tree. If it doesn't make it, then they have to pay out of their pocket to get to success on the tree's survival. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a tree warranty.
Yeah, that's a good way to characterize it. Thank you.
Great. And then soil volume standards. So as I mentioned before, this is just ensuring that there's the appropriate amount of soil for a tree. This is really important so you don't get a tree that either dies because it doesn't have enough soil nutrients to sustain its growth, or you don't end up with trees that are planted in inappropriate soil volumes, causing them to bust out of their concrete or their location to find new nutrients. Just as an illustrative example, down in this little cropped picture on the bottom, these are the same species of tree. And you can see some have larger soil volume, others do not. There's also other conditions, of course, being right next to a road and being surrounded by concrete or any sort of impervious surface can cause some potential more trauma to the tree. But you can see here that there's one side obviously looks like it's growing a little bit better. And that's kind of what some of the success that we're trying to encourage through soil volume standards. So for all of these standards, there's mitigation available. So for our preservation standards and canopy standards, so those are those canopy percentages that we're looking at. There's mitigation if you hit each of those tiers. So you take down a lot of trees and you kind of keep going tier to tier. There's mitigation fees for the developer. And then if you don't plant back up to 40%, there's fees that can be paid. And so one thing that we did want to encourage, and that came from suggestions from council and planning commission and community members, is essentially a variance for sustainable alternative construction designs. So we ensured that there was variance language for situations like this. It goes to planning commission for review. And so things like, community gardens, things like, for say renewable energy, like these solar panels you see here, that actually could apply for a variance. And if it deems to have equivalent environmental benefit, planning commission can essentially approve it. I do like to add as a caveat, whenever I bring up solar, people always think that it's solar or trees. I do want to, for anyone who's listening, there are many, many solar friendly trees that don't grow above, say 16, 17 feet. And then also ways to arrange solar panels so they're not in conflict with trees. People often think that you have to have one or the other. And I don't want folks to think that this is a choice that they have to make. Okay, and so this is just I just laid this out for planning commission, and I kept it in here really briefly, just so you see kind of the path if somebody were to apply as a developer to do any sort of tree removals, the process they have to take. First, they go through a tree inventory, just showing what trees that they have. Then a preservation plan, what trees are they keeping? Tree canopy plan, what trees are they planting? And then an arborist report, which says essentially, hey, here's all this information plus all these protection and soil volume standards. And here's this all packaged up. So it's fairly simple. It's also going to be going through with the planning department, and staff will be there to help. Low income assistance. So this is just letting know that we have low income assistance for our public tree code as well. We're going to be extending it to the private tree code just to help out with any sort of permit fees that might be needed. And our staff are happy to talk to folks about it to see if they apply. We'd be doing the same income level as our construction excise tax, our home energy score, and our public tree code programs. So the one key question that I do have for council. So first, actually, I'm going to ask, are there any questions on any of the standards that I didn't address? great. I need to be going at 9 p.m. in the future because it's quiet. So my question is, we developed this tree code, and we have this non-development residential tree code, and then we have this development residential tree code. And the development residential tree code kicks in when you build an additional housing unit, right? Or you're doing land subdivision. Well, I guess when we're, working out kind of this code, we always assumed that a housing unit might expand the footprint of the building. And then we were thinking about it. Oh, cute kitty, Lisa. And then we were thinking about it. If somebody was essentially adding an additional housing unit in their basement, that's an additional housing unit, but they're not necessarily expanding the footprint of the building. So my question for you is, should the development standards be triggered by an additional housing unit, or only additional units that expand the footprint of the building?
And this, I do want to give credit. Anne asked me this question, and I said sort of the way that the code is written now, that it didn't really, there wouldn't be that requirement for that additional, impacts to those trees.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that Laura and Vera and I were floating around this week was, are there certain standards that you care about that might get triggered even if you're not expanding the footprint of the building? For example, if you were adding an ADU in your basement, you're not going to be theoretically removing any trees for the footprint of the building. And if you were, you could do a type 1 simplified tree removal. You're not necessarily needing to do a soil volume, standard, because you're not going to be planting any you might not be planting any new trees. And then you also won't need protection standards because you're not going to be theoretically having too much heavy equipment, but you might. So there's kind of all these standards that play around that are very situational. You could also only have the canopy standard. So if you're building any additional housing unit, you have to plant back up to 40%. So I guess the question for you is hearing of these different standards and the purpose behind them, do you want them all to apply? Or are there only certain ones that you want to apply? Or do you just want this to be triggered by an additional housing unit that expands the footprint of the building?
Or additional impervious surface area, right?
Right, correct.
So I was kind of going to go to there. If it disturbs, if there's a soil disturbance, right? If you have to bring in a heavy machine to dig out part of the basement because you had a half basement, but that's where you're expanding. It's not technically expanding the footprint, but you had to bring in a machine to do it. Or you're adding a sidewalk because now you have a new entrance, or you're adding another parking place, so you add more driveway or whatever. I think that would then trigger all the things. But unless there is soil disturbance, then it would only trigger the 40% canopy. This is off the top of my head, but it feels like none of the rest of that stuff should be triggered if what you're doing is interior work in the building and there's no impact to the surrounding land.
So would it all trigger, or would you just want to trigger the protections for existing trees?
Well, you trigger whatever you would affect, right? So protections to the trees. Obviously, if you are having to plant trees, then that triggers the bonding if we're going to do that.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding. If we're saying that the footprint is, whether or not the footprint changes of pervious, the amount of, if we're talking about whether or not the amount of impervious surface on the lot is the determining factor on whether, okay.
Disturbance of earth. If you are going to drive a machine across the lawn to dig out the soil, you've now probably driven over roots. You're probably, or potentially driven over roots. So you have to protect those roots.
Right.
If you're not disturbing any soil anywhere,
I guess I'm confused as to why driving over roots would lead to needing to plant more trees by necessity.
Well, the 40% I think is not on the table. I think we're still saying you have to, if you're doing well, maybe it's not. In my mind, it is. 40% is the 40% always. If you're doing a new development, you have to hit 40%.
Even if you're in the footprint.
So my question was, if we've talked about creating duplexes out of existing homes. Right. So if you're going to create a new duplex by simply changing the footprint inside your existing structure, is this triggered? You're not doing any other work on the property. And my thought is no, but the way we've talked about this in code, my concern was the answer was yes. So I just want to make sure that we're transparent either way. If you're not touching the yard, are you touching this code?
I mean, if the answer is yes, then as someone who it would take an architect, but we could add a second unit in our house, preserving the footprint. I have a major disincentive to do that because I can't have more trees on my property and still be able to garden the way I need to garden, or preserve my solar panels on my roof. So I'm all for the 40%, but I think that in this specific application, when we're talking about existing structures and a footprint that doesn't change, I think we would be shooting ourselves in the proverbial foot there.
Well, see, now you've touched into something completely different, which is other ways that trees are affecting property, gardening, solar arrays, right? That's why I think the fee in lieu should be an allowable thing, so that gives us funds to go plant trees elsewhere.
We are now actually in a hearing style conversation. My comment was only to say this is what I meant in the question, but I don't think we can reach it tonight. And we're now we're debating what y'all want to do. I don't think you can answer it at 9:32.
Well, I guess I just want to lend my voice to my gut reaction is if there are no other changes, I don't see how finishing your basement should touch on this. That makes, that doesn't feel right to me. So I'd like to, I guess, maybe we need to explore this further at a hearing setting, but I guess I just want to lend my voice to I'm kind of with Kathy on this one. I don't think we get into assessing fees or triggering this code because it doesn't seem like it's meant for this situation.
So it's not determined, and we need to decide at a hearing.
Well, and let me throw one more issue in there, which is assuming you're going to do some amount of soil disturbance. You're not going to remove any trees, but you're going to do some amount of soil disturbance because you're going to build a new sidewalk. Should that be enough or not? And I would point to our Willamette Greenway code as maybe something to think about in that regard, which is it allows so many square feet of disturbance before you trigger an actual Willamette Greenway. So if you're setting 200 feet of sidewalk, you wouldn't trigger that. But if you were doing, a big driveway and 200, whatever, I don't know what the footage is, but I do think we have an example in our code of a place where we have a de minimis, an exemption for a de minimis amount of impervious surface. We might want to think about that.
Okay. Great. And that's everything that I had for you. So is there any other questions, any suggestions, any concepts that you'd like staff to explore? Sounds like we want to bring back maybe a few different varieties of ways that we can trigger, I'll say, the development code. Are folks comfortable with kind of the standard concepts that we have? Or are you just excited to see us come back with the details in January?
I think we're tired. Honestly, and I don't want
to jazzed to talk tree code that I am.
No, we are, and actually, I've seen a lot of excitement for 9:30 at night. So I don't want to dismiss this, and I really do appreciate how much time and effort you have put into this, Natalie. It's pretty incredible. The only other thing that I think we'll probably need to talk about is this is a very rigorous code. There's a lot of unfunded stuff in here. So at some point, we're going to have to just talk about that because it's a lot of staff capacity. So different problem. We'll be transparent about that with you all as we're going through the code package, but that is one piece. Councilor Beatty.
So I have a question that we don't have to resolve tonight. And actually, I wouldn't expect us to resolve it tonight, but I wanted to put it out there, which is we are going to come back in January and have hearings. I think let me start with, there was a proposal at a meeting around August or September about a moratorium on tree cutting, and we didn't pursue that. But we do know that tree cutting, is happening. Do we want to consider putting this first and adopting it first, even if it's not perfect, and even if we know we'll have to make some amendments as we work on the other package? But is that something we want to consider doing because we're worried about? I mean, I think the rest of the package has the potential to drag on for several meetings. So if it drags on into March or even April, are we, talking about trees this whole time and creating more and more problem with people doing sort of preemptive tree cutting? So I'll just put that out there as a question to ponder.
And I don't know what conversations have happened with staff, but I can take that question back to them and we can chat upon it.
Natalie, I did actually have a couple of things that came out of reading some of the testimony that was submitted around the tree code. And I would like more information about the water bill credit that Portland has for 4 or more trees. And I think you probably have had conversations with Vera about the interactions between the tree code and any changes and setbacks we might suggest. But I am specifically requesting that you guys really think about that and what setback changes do to our ability to, get trees planted. Thanks.
Will do.
Anything else? Okay. Hi, Adam. I'm not going to let you talk, though, because we're going to go to bed.
Not Peter. I love that. He, him, not Peter.
Okay. I think we're good on tree code, but I do, since I have everybody here, just want to talk very briefly about NCPRD. So there is, we have received information from NCPRD that what they had originally told us is not correct. So they were supposed to take our interlocal agreement on the funding agreement straight to they were going to show it to the DAC, and then they were going to take it to the county commission. They have now said, nope, going to have a vote by the DAC, and they're also now saying that if that vote does not go in favor of the park, that it doesn't proceed, which is not actually what we discussed in the creation of the board, and it causes some broader problems. But for right now, the conversation that we've had with Councilor Nicodemus as the liaison and Mayor Gamba as the person who's been testifying most recently is that we would really like to have some support at the DAC meeting in order to encourage the support of Milwaukie Bay Park at that site. So that meeting is taking place on January 12th. It starts at 5:30 p.m. I have contacted the director. He is recommending that whoever is speaking be there by about 6. because it is the second agenda item, and there's a belief that they will hold the testimony portion during the actual discussion around Milwaukie Bay Park at the meeting. So 6 p.m. If you are able to, I believe Councilor Nicodemus will be at the meeting, and I believe the mayor is planning to testify. We also are asking the Parks Foundation to come to that meeting and PARB members to go to the meeting to talk about the importance of this park. Adam has come up with some just general overviews from our past and the history of this park and the work that you all have put into it. So I'm going to send that around to you all just so you have the content. You can write, say whatever you feel in your heart, but this gives you at least some of the factual stuff from behind those discussions, so you have it in your pocket. Is there anything that I missed, Natalie, or is there anything else that council members want to talk about on this?
It's not our meeting. Can we all go and or more than two of us go and not have a quorum problem, or do we still have a quorum issue even though it's not our meeting?
You're talking about a policy at a meeting, and it is one that you all have said you directly affect and may make choices around in the future and on your own, but I would defer to the attorneys on the call.
It's an interesting question, Councilor Beatty. I hadn't thought about that. Let me give some thought. I'll send you guys an email tomorrow. Generally speaking, I don't think you would necessarily have a problem since you are there to testify. I would encourage you all to not gather together. This sort of the standard protections against, oh my gosh, there's 3 city council members from Milwaukie over there in a huddle talking about what they're going to say. But I certainly don't think that you would all be precluded, and would almost look at it as if it was kind of a social event, really. The same type of protections if you were all going to be, at a cocktail party for, at a post-election party or something like that.
Well, and the comments are going to be made in public at a public noticed meeting, so I think you're probably okay on that front too. Right. We'll send an email tomorrow, but honestly, if all 5 of you can make it, please make it. I think that the more we talk about the importance to all of you, you've worked on this for a long time, the better. So thank you, Justin, for that. And
right, I almost think what Ann just said kind of outweighs, since it's a public forum, outweighs any quorum argument that somebody might make against you. What would be the actual penalty or relief? I just don't see it being a problem.
The relief would be you'd come back to this meeting and say, I went and testified. Oh, I heard you. You were great. Right? Like it's just
exactly
the same. Yeah. Okay. So if you can, I will send out a meeting notice, like a meeting invite, just so you have it on your calendars. You can choose whether or not you're going to attend the meeting. We'll also get you the speaking points. You can use them at your discretion. I know you each have already testified before the Clackamas Council as well, Commission. So feel free to go back to your own speaking points on that front as well. But we've been told that this is important, that we need to have people there, and that this is a critical meeting. If it's successful, then we will have a NCPRD board meeting next. And I, again, would encourage all of you to do this again. I think at this point, we need to just push as much as you can.
I did want to mention Adam keyed into this by going to several of the DAC meetings, some of the special DAC meetings in November and early December, and saw a concerted effort with the Concord project, with a lot of vocal proponents at those meetings talking about the Concord project, and DAC responding to those proponents. So.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it. Okay, that's all I have, Mayor, for tonight.
Okay, anybody else, anything? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to go blue, go Bearcats, and to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year,
Happy
everybody.
holidays, everybody.
Take care.